Mason Carter hadn't been on a date in 6 years. He hadn't planned on going on one tonight either. But when the woman sitting across from him at a restaurant he couldn't afford leaned forward and whispered, "Your daughter helped set this up," Mason felt the floor tilt beneath him, because his 8-year-old, Ava, was supposed to be asleep at home. She wasn't supposed to know about tonight, and she definitely wasn't supposed to have contacted a woman worth more money than Mason would earn in 10 lifetimes. Yet somehow, she had done exactly that. If you want to find out how a single father's life gets turned completely upside down by a little girl's drawing and a billionaire who's been running from her own loneliness, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let me see just how far this story travels. Part 1. The fluorescent lights above Bay 3 had been flickering since Tuesday, and Mason Carter kept forgetting to fix them. Which was ironic considering he fixed things for a living. Other people's cars, other people's engines, other people's problems. Those he could handle. His own stuff had a way of sliding to the bottom of the list. He was underneath a 2019 Ford F-15. Oh, arms aching, his back pressed against the cold concrete creeper, when Danny Reeves kicked the side of his boot. "You're ignoring me," Danny said. "I'm working." "You're hiding." Mason slid out from under the truck and squinted up at his coworker. Danny was leaning against the lift post with his arms crossed, wearing that particular grin that always meant trouble. He was shorter than Mason by a good 4 inches, rounder by about 30 pounds, and roughly 10 times more interested in everyone else's personal life than his own. "I already said no," Mason told him. "You said no yesterday. Today's a new day. New possibilities." "Same answer." Mason stood up, wiped his hands on a rag that was already too dirty to clean anything, and walked toward the parts bench. His shoulders ached. His lower back had been giving him grief since last week when he'd spent 3 hours replacing a transmission on a Chevy Tahoe that should have been scrapped years ago. He was 32, but some mornings his body felt closer to 50. "Mason, listen to me." Danny followed him like a dog chasing a mailman. "My wife's friend Victoria. She's smart. She's successful, she's gorgeous, and for some reason that nobody on this planet can explain, she agreed to a blind date. Then you go." "I'm married, you idiot." "Sounds like a personal problem." Danny sighed dramatically and leaned against the workbench. "When's the last time you went out? And I don't mean to the grocery store, I mean out, like with a woman, wearing something that doesn't have motor oil on it." Mason didn't answer because the answer was embarrassing. 6 years. 6 years since he'd sat across from someone at a table and tried to be interesting. 6 years since he'd even wanted to. After Jenna left, just packed a bag one morning and drove away like motherhood was a job she'd decided to quit, Mason had sealed that part of himself shut. Not out of bitterness, exactly, more out of practicality. There was only so much of him to go around, and Ava needed all of it. "I've got Ava," he said, which was always the answer. The safe answer. The brick wall he could throw up whenever someone tried to push him towards something that felt dangerous. "Your mom can watch Ava for one night." "My mom watches Ava 3 days a week already. I'm not going to ask her for more." "Then I'll ask her." "Danny, she already said yes." Mason froze with the wrench in his hand. "You called my mother?" "She called me, actually. I may have mentioned it to Karen, who may have mentioned it to your mom at book club. And your mom may have said, and I'm quoting here, 'That boy needs to get out of that house before he turns into furniture.'" Mason closed his eyes. The betrayal wasn't surprising. His mother and Danny's wife had been friends for years, and both of them had made it their shared mission to drag Mason back into the world of the living. He'd been resisting successfully for a long time, but they were getting more organized. "One dinner," Danny said. "That's it. You go. You eat something that isn't microwaved, you talk to a human woman who isn't your mother or your daughter, and you come home. If it's terrible, I'll never bring it up again. You'll bring it up every day for the rest of my life. Probably, but at least you'll have a story." Mason stared at the wrench, at the grease under his fingernails, at the fluorescent light still flickering above Bay 3. "What's her name again?" he asked, and immediately hated himself for asking. Danny's grin could have powered the whole shop. "Victoria Hale." "And what does she do?" There was a pause. A small, loaded pause that Mason didn't like. She runs a company, Danny said carefully. What kind of company? A large one. Danny. She's a CEO of a tech company, a big tech company, a very, very big. How big? Danny winced. $1 billion range. Mason actually laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when something is so absurd that your brain can't process it as real. A billionaire CEO wants to go on a blind date with a mechanic who drives a truck with a cracked windshield. She doesn't know what you do. Great, so it'll be a surprise. A really fun surprise when she sees me show up smelling like transmission fluid. You're not going to smell like transmission fluid. You're going to shower. You're going to put on that blue button-down I know you own because I was with you when you bought it for Ava's school concert. And you're going to walk into Marchetti's on 4th Street at 7:30 on Friday night like you belong there. Marchetti's? That place has cloth napkins, Danny. Most restaurants have cloth napkins. Not the ones I go to. Danny put his hand on Mason's shoulder, and for a moment the joking fell away. Danny's face went serious, which was rare and therefore effective. I know you think you're fine, Danny said. I know you think this is enough. Work, Ava. Sleep, repeat. And maybe it is enough for now. But she's going to grow up, Mason. She's going to go to school dances and football games, and eventually she's going to leave. And you're going to be sitting in that house by yourself wondering where all the years went. Mason said nothing. One dinner, Danny repeated. That's all I'm asking. Okay. Friday came faster than Mason wanted it to. He stood in his bedroom, which was really just the back room of the small 2-bedroom house he rented on Chestnut Street, and stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. The blue button-down fit tighter than he remembered. He'd put on some weight in the shoulders from work, and the fabric pulled slightly across his chest. His hair was damp from the shower, pushed back the way he used to wear it years ago before he stopped caring. He'd shaved, nicking himself twice on the jaw because the razor was dull, and he'd forgotten to buy new blades. He looked like a man trying too hard, which was worse, he thought, than a man not trying at all. Daddy, he turned. Ava was standing in the doorway, still in her pajamas, even though it was barely 6:30. Her brown hair was tangled from rolling around on the couch, and she was holding her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Buttons, by one ear. Hey, Bug, why aren't you in bed? Grandma said you're going somewhere. Grandma talks too much. Ava tilted her head, studying him the way she studied everything, with an intensity that made him feel like he was being read by someone much older than 8. She had her mother's eyes, green and wide and constantly cataloging the world, but everything else was Mason, the stubborn jaw, the way she crossed her arms when she disagreed with something, the habit of going quiet when her feelings were too big for words. You look nice, she said, like it was a scientific observation. Thanks. Where are you going? He hesitated. He'd thought about lying, saying he was meeting Danny for a beer or going to pick up a part for a car at the shop, but Mason had made a rule years ago. He didn't lie to Ava. Not about anything. She'd already had one parent disappear without explanation. He wasn't going to be the second parent who hid things. I'm going to dinner, he said, with a woman. Ava's eyebrows went up, not in a dramatic way, more like a slight adjustment, the way a scientist looks when an experiment yields unexpected data. Like a date? Kind of? What's her name? Victoria. Is she nice? I don't know yet. That's sort of the point of dinner. Ava considered this. She sat down on the edge of his bed, Mr. Buttons balanced on her knee, and watched him fumble with his collar in the mirror. Mason could feel her thinking. She was always thinking. Are you scared? She asked. The question hit him in a place he wasn't prepared for. He turned around and looked at her. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't being dramatic. She was asking because she genuinely wanted to know, and because she knew him well enough to see it. Yeah, he admitted. A little. Why? Because I don't know how to do this anymore. Because the last woman I cared about left us both without looking back. Because I'm afraid I'll embarrass myself. Because I'm afraid I won't. Because if this goes well, it means something might change. And I've spent 6 years making sure nothing changes, because change is the thing that breaks people. He didn't say any of that. Because it's been a long time, he said instead. Ava nodded slowly, like this was a reasonable answer. Then she slid off the bed and walked out of the room without another word. Mason's mother arrived at 7. Patricia Carter was 61, sharp-tongued, and physically incapable of minding her own business. She walked in carrying a grocery bag full of snacks for Ava and a look on her face that suggested she'd been waiting for this night for years. "Don't say anything," Mason warned. "I wasn't going to." "Your mouth was already open." "I was breathing, Mason. People breathe." He grabbed his jacket off the hook by the door. The brown one, the only jacket he owned that didn't have a shop logo on the back, and checked his pockets for his wallet and keys. His mom was already settling onto the couch with Ava, pulling out coloring books and animal crackers. "Be home by 11, Patricia called after him. "I'm 32. "And I'm your mother. 11. He was halfway out the door when Ava appeared in the hallway. "Daddy, wait." He turned. She ran up to him, reached up on her tiptoes, and shoved something into the inside pocket of his jacket, a folded piece of paper. He could feel the waxy thickness of crayon through the fabric. "What's this?" "Don't open it," she said firmly. "Not yet." "When do I open it?" She thought about it. Her face scrunched up the way it did when she was choosing her words carefully, which was most of the time. "When the moment feels right," she said. He didn't know what that meant. He wasn't sure she did either. But she looked so serious standing there in her pajamas with her tangled hair and her rabbit dangling from one hand that he just nodded. "Okay, Bug. I won't open it until the moment feels right." She smiled, a small, private smile, and turned back toward the living room. Dicek. Marchetti's was everything Mason had feared. The restaurant sat on a corner of 4th Street downtown, all exposed brick and warm lighting and candles on every table. The kind of place where people ordered wine by the glass and the waiters wore actual vests. Mason parked his truck 2 blocks away because he didn't want Victoria, or anyone, to see the cracked windshield and the duct tape holding the side mirror in place. He walked in at 7:28, hands in his pockets, and immediately felt like he'd wandered into someone else's life. The hostess smiled at him, and he gave Danny's name for the reservation, and she led him to a corner table with actual flowers on it, white ones, in a small glass vase. He sat down, picked up the menu, put it down, picked it up again. The prices didn't have dollar signs, which was either fancy or terrifying, and most of the dishes had words he didn't recognize. He could feel the folded paper in his jacket pocket, pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. 7:30 came, then 7:35. Mason started doing that thing he did when he was anxious, tapping his thumb against the edge of the table in a steady rhythm, like a metronome set to the speed of mild panic. "She's not coming," he thought. And honestly, why would she? A CEO, a billionaire. She probably Googled him, found his Facebook page with the profile picture from 3 years ago, saw the truck, saw the house, saw the whole life, and thought, absolutely not. He was reaching for his phone to text Danny something unpleasant when the front door opened. The woman who walked in was not what he expected. He'd expected polish. He'd expected shine. Some kind of corporate armor. The heels, the perfect hair, the smile that looked designed in a marketing meeting, and parts of that were there. She wore a dark coat over a simple black dress. Her hair was dark, pulled back, a few strands loose around her face. She moved with the kind of posture that came from years of walking into rooms where everyone was watching. But what he noticed first, before the coat, before the dress, before the way the hostess practically snapped to attention, was her eyes. They were scanning the room the way his did, quickly, nervously, looking for the exits and the dangers and the safest place to sit. He recognized that look because he wore it every single day. It was the look of someone who was always bracing for impact. She saw him. Their eyes met across the restaurant, and for one very brief, very honest second, they were just two people who didn't want to be there. Then she walked over. "Mason?" "Yeah." He stood up too fast, knocked his knee against the table. The water glasses wobbled, smooth, very smooth. "I mean, yes. Hi, Mason Carter." She extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her fingers cold. "Victoria Hale." They sat. The silence that followed was thick and awkward, and exactly what Mason had expected. He picked up the menu again. She picked up hers. He stared at words he couldn't pronounce. She stared at hers like she was reading a quarterly report. "So," he said. "So," she said. More silence. "I should tell you," Mason started, because he decided on the drive over that honesty was the only strategy he had. "I'm not great at this. I haven't been on a date in 6 years. I don't know what half the things on this menu are. And I'm pretty sure my jacket has a crayon stain on the sleeve from this morning." He watched her face, waiting for the polite smile, the graceful exit, the "excuse me, I need to use the restroom" that turned into a disappearing act. Instead, something shifted in her expression. Something small. The corporate mask slipped half an inch, and underneath it was something that looked almost like relief. "I haven't been on a date in 4 years," she said. "I only agreed to this because my assistant has been scheduling things on my personal calendar without telling me, and by the time I noticed, she'd already confirmed. I considered canceling 11 times today. I'm wearing a dress I bought 3 years ago for an event I didn't go to. And I almost turned around in the parking lot." Mason blinked. 11 times? I counted. He felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. "I only thought about canceling 8 times, so I guess I win." "That's not how winning works. I'm a single dad. I take victories where I can get them." That got her. A real reaction. Not a laugh exactly, but a softening. A crack in the wall she'd walked in with. She set her menu down and looked at him directly for the first time, and Mason felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not attraction, not yet. Something simpler, something more dangerous. Recognition. The waiter came. Mason ordered the steak because it was the only thing he was sure he could pronounce. Victoria ordered pasta and a glass of red wine. Mason asked for a beer, then changed his mind and asked for water, then changed his mind again and said beer was fine, and Victoria watched the whole performance with an expression that was either amusement or pity. He couldn't tell. "Tell me about your daughter," she said, once the waiter left. "Ava." Just saying her name changed his posture. His shoulders dropped. His hands stopped fidgeting. She was the one subject he never fumbled. "She's 8. She's smarter than me, which isn't a high bar, but she's smarter than most adults too. She reads constantly. She draws everything. She asked me last week what the word existential meant, and I had to look it up before I could explain it." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it's when you think so hard about life that you forget to live it. She said that sounded like me." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "Smart kid." "Too smart. She's going to be running things someday. I just hope I can keep up long enough to watch." The food arrived. Mason's steak was good. Better than good, actually, but he wasn't about to admit that Danny had been right about the restaurant. Victoria ate slowly, precisely, cutting her pasta into measured portions. Everything about her was controlled. The way she held her fork, the way she sipped her wine, the way she answered questions, carefully, like each word was being weighed before it was released. "Your turn," Mason said. "Tell me something about you that isn't on a company website." She paused mid-sip, set her glass down. "That's a surprisingly specific request. I figure you've done 100 interviews where people ask you about quarterly earnings and market strategy. I don't know what any of that means, so tell me something real." The word real landed harder than he intended. He saw it hit her, saw her eyes flicker, saw the mask threaten to slide back into place. But it didn't. Not completely. "I collect old maps," she said quietly. "Antique ones. From the 1800s mostly. I have a whole wall of them in my apartment." "Why maps?" "Because they show you what people thought the world looked like before they knew the truth. All these blank spaces labeled unknown territory. I find that comforting." "Why comforting?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because it means not knowing where you're going used to be normal. Everyone acts like you're supposed to have your whole life figured out by 30, but 200 years ago, half the map was just empty, and people still kept moving." Mason hadn't expected that. He'd expected her to say something about investment returns or corporate leadership, or the kind of motivational nonsense people printed on office posters. Instead, she'd said something honest, and the honesty of it sat between them like a third person at the table. "I restore old motorcycles," he offered. In my garage, not for money, just because I like taking broken things and making them run again. Is that a metaphor? No, it's a hobby, but if you want to read into it, you're welcome to. She almost smiled. Almost. How long have you been raising Ava alone? And there it was. The question everyone eventually asked. The question that came with assumptions attached, about failure, about being left, about not being enough. Mason set his fork down and decided to answer it the way he answered everything with Ava. Straight. Since she was 2, her mom left. Not dramatically, no fight, no note, no big blow-up. She just woke up one morning and said she wasn't built for this. Packed a bag. Drove away. I haven't heard from her since. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. Don't be. I was angry for a long time. Confused for longer. But Ava's okay. She's better than okay. She's the best thing I've ever done, and I didn't even do it right. I just showed up every day and tried not to screw it up too badly. That's more than a lot of people manage. Yeah, well, he took a drink of his beer. The bar's pretty low. The restaurant was starting to thin out, couples leaving, tables being cleared, the noise settling into something quieter and more intimate. Mason noticed they'd been talking for over an hour without either of them checking their phone. That felt significant, though he wasn't sure why. Can I ask you something? He said. You've been asking me things all night. One more. Why did you agree to this? A blind date. You could go out with anyone, CEOs, tech guys. Those people on the covers of magazines. Why a setup from someone's wife's friend's coworker? Victoria turned her wine glass slowly between her fingers. The candle on the table caught the edge of the glass and threw a small line of light across her face. Because nobody sets me up, she said. Nobody in my world does that. They pitch things to me. They network with me. They want access. Nobody just says, hey, I know a nice guy, you should meet him. That hasn't happened since I was in college. And when Karen called my assistant and described you, a single dad, a mechanic, a man who reads bedtime stories to his daughter every night, I thought, I don't know. I thought maybe that kind of person wouldn't want anything from me. And I was tired of people wanting things from me. The weight of that sentence settled over the table. I don't want anything from you, Egg, Mason said simply. I'm not even sure I should be here. That makes 2 of us. So what are we doing? Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, in a way that felt like she was deciding something important. I think, she said slowly, we're just being honest with each other, which is terrifying. Yeah, Mason agreed. It really is. Tab. The check came. Mason reached for it out of reflex, the same way he reached for everything, instinctively, without thinking, because taking care of things was all he knew how to do. But the number at the bottom made his stomach drop. $214 for 2 meals and 3 drinks. He didn't flinch. He'd learned a long time ago not to flinch at things he couldn't control. He pulled out his card, the one with the low limit that he used for emergencies, and set it on the tray before Victoria could say anything. But she saw it. Of course she did. She saw everything. Mason, it's fine. It's fine, he repeated, and there was something in his voice that made her stop. Not anger, something closer to pride, the fragile, bruised kind that working people carry like a shield. She didn't push it, which told him more about her than the whole dinner had. They walked out together into the cold. The sidewalk was damp from an earlier rain, and the streetlights threw long reflections across the pavement. Their breath made small clouds in the air. Mason shoved his hands in his pockets and felt the folded paper again. Ava's drawing. He'd almost forgotten. I had a good time, Victoria said. She was standing a few feet away, her coat pulled tight, her car somewhere behind her in the lot. She said it the way people say things when they're surprised by the truth of them. Me too, Mason said, and meant it, which scared him. They stood there for a moment, 2 people who didn't know how to end something that neither of them had expected to start. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was full, heavy with things unsaid and possibilities neither of them was ready to name. I should go, he said. My mom will worry. Right, and I have a 6 a.m. call with investors in Tokyo. Sounds fun. It's not. He almost laughed. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Mason. He turned and walked toward his truck. One step, two, three. The cold air bit at his face, and the night pressed down around him, and with every step, the restaurant got farther away and his regular life got closer. The house on Chestnut Street. The flickering light above Bay 3. The routine that kept him safe and sane and completely, utterly alone. His hand brushed the paper in his pocket. He stopped. Don't open it unless the moment feels right. He pulled it out. Unfolded it carefully, because Ava's drawings deserved care, even the quick ones. Even the ones she'd scribbled at the kitchen table while eating cereal. 2 stick figures, one tall, one slightly shorter, holding hands. Crude, crooked, drawn with the earnest imprecision of a child who hadn't yet learned that lines were supposed to be straight. Underneath, in Ava's careful, wobbly handwriting, be kind to her. Maybe she's lonely too. Mason stared at the drawing. The streetlight above him buzzed faintly, and the cold turned his breath into mist, and for a moment the whole city went quiet. She's lonely too. His 8-year-old daughter, who couldn't spell restaurant and still slept with a stuffed rabbit, had seen something in a stranger she'd never met that Mason had spent the entire evening pretending not to notice. Victoria Hale, with her billion-dollar company and her antique maps and her carefully constructed walls, she was lonely. And not the kind of lonely that goes away at parties or in boardrooms, or when your name is on the side of a building, the kind that lives in the silence after everyone leaves, the kind Mason knew like a second skin. He folded the drawing and put it back in his pocket. Then he turned around. Victoria was still there. She hadn't moved. She was standing on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand, staring at the screen without really seeing it, delaying. The way people delay when they don't actually want to leave. Victoria. She looked up. He walked back toward her. Not fast, not slow, just steady, the way you walk toward something when you've finally decided to stop running. My daughter, he said, when he was close enough to see her breath in the cold air. Apparently planned this whole thing. Victoria's eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? He held out the drawing. She took it carefully, the way you hold something fragile, and tilted it toward the streetlight. He watched her read the words. He watched her face change. Not dramatically. Victoria Hale didn't do dramatic. But the mask came off, all the way off. And underneath it was something raw and unguarded, and so achingly human that Mason had to look away for a second. She doesn't even know me, Victoria whispered. She doesn't have to. She's 8. 8-year-olds see things we can't anymore. Victoria stared at the drawing for a long time. Then she reached into her coat pocket, not the one with her phone, the other one, the inside pocket, and pulled out something small. A piece of paper, yellowed and soft with age, folded into a tiny square. What's that? Mason asked. She unfolded it slowly. Another drawing. This one was older, more faded, drawn with colored pencils instead of crayons. It showed 2 girls standing under a big yellow sun. One was taller, one was shorter. They were holding hands. Beneath them, in a child's handwriting, even more uneven than Ava's, were the words, "You're not invisible. I see you." My little sister made this for me, Victoria said. Her voice was steady, but her hand wasn't. I was 12. She was 7. I'd come home from school crying because nobody talked to me. We just moved. My father got transferred, new city, new school, and I spent every lunch period sitting alone in the library pretending I was choosing to be there. She paused. My parents didn't notice. They were busy. They were always busy. Building things. The company, the reputation, the image. My father used to say feelings were a luxury that productive people couldn't afford, so I stopped talking about them. But Lily noticed. She drew this and slid it under my bedroom door. Mason looked at the drawing, at the 2 girls holding hands under their yellow sun. Do you still talk to her, Lily? Every Sunday. She's the only person in my family I talk to. She sounds like Ava. Victoria looked up at him, and for one unguarded moment her eyes were wet. Not crying, just full. She does, doesn't she? They stood there on the cold sidewalk, holding 2 children's drawings made years apart, and something shifted between them. Not a decision, not a promise, just an opening. A door that had been locked for a very long time, creaking open just enough to let in a sliver of light. I should go, Victoria said again, but she didn't move. Can I call you? Mason asked. Not because I'm trying to be smooth. I'm clearly terrible at smooth, but because I think I think maybe we both needed tonight, and I'm not sure I'm ready for it to just be one night. Victoria folded her sister's drawing and put it back in her pocket. She folded Ava's drawing and held it out to him. "Keep it," he said. "Ava would want you to have it." Something crossed her face that he couldn't name. Surprise, maybe. Or something deeper. People gave Victoria Hale things all the time. Contracts, proposals, business cards, pitch decks. But nobody gave her crayon drawings made by 8-year-olds who thought she might be lonely. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I can call you?" "Yes, you can call me." He nodded. She nodded. Neither of them moved for another 3 seconds that felt like 30. Then Victoria turned toward the parking lot, and Mason turned toward his truck, and they walked in opposite directions through the cold. The house was quiet when he got home. His mother was asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest. He covered her with the blanket from the back of the chair and stood there for a moment, listening. Ava's bedroom door was cracked open. He could see the glow of her nightlight, the one shaped like a moon that she'd picked out at Target 2 years ago. He pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. She was asleep. Mr. Buttons was tucked under her arm. Her hair was spread across the pillow like she'd been tossing around before finally surrendering to sleep. On her nightstand, next to a glass of water and a stack of library books, was an open sketchbook. She'd been drawing before bed. The page showed a house with smoke coming from the chimney and 3 figures standing in front of it. Not 2, 3. Mason sat down on the floor beside her bed. He pulled his knees up and leaned his head back against the wall and looked at the ceiling. The moon nightlight cast soft blue shadows across the room. He thought about Victoria's eyes when she'd read Ava's words, the way her hand had trembled holding that old drawing from her sister, the way she'd said, "You can call me," like she was giving him something expensive and hoping he wouldn't break it. He thought about Danny, who would want a full report tomorrow and would absolutely never let this go. He thought about the $214 dinner he couldn't afford and didn't regret. Mostly he thought about the fact that his 8-year-old daughter had somehow understood, with the terrifying clarity that only children possess, that the woman sitting across from her father tonight carried the same emptiness he did. That loneliness recognizes loneliness, even across tax brackets, even across worlds that should never have overlapped. He reached over and gently fixed Ava's blanket where it had slipped off her shoulder. She stirred slightly, murmured something he couldn't hear, and settled back into sleep. "You did good, Bug," he whispered. He sat there for a long time, longer than he should have, listening to his daughter breathe, feeling the weight of something he hadn't felt in years. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too clean a word for it. This was messier than hope, rougher around the edges. It was the feeling you get when you've been holding your breath for so long that you've forgotten you're doing it, and then something cracks, and air rushes in, and it hurts. It actually hurts, that first real breath, because your lungs have to remember how to expand. Mason sat on the floor of his daughter's room and let it hurt. Then he got up quietly and walked to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, took out his phone. He typed a message, deleted it, typed another one. Deleted that too. The third attempt was simple and honest and completely inadequate, which made it perfect. "Got home safe. Ava's asleep. Tonight was really good. Mason." He sent it before he could change his mind. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "I'm glad you turned around." He stared at those 5 words until the screen went dark. Then he set the phone on the counter, finished his water, and went to wake his mother so she could sleep in the guest room instead of on the couch. The fluorescent light above Bay 3 was still going to need fixing on Monday. The cracked windshield wasn't going to repair itself. Ava's school had a parent-teacher conference next week that he kept forgetting to put on the calendar. The rent was due in 9 days, and the transmission job he'd been counting on had fallen through. Nothing about his life had changed. Everything about his life had changed. Mason Carter turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hallway to his room. And for the first time in 6 years, the house on Chestnut Street didn't feel quite so small. 3 days passed before Mason called her. Not because he didn't want to. He'd picked up his phone at least a dozen times. Standing at the workbench, sitting in the pickup line at Ava's school, lying in bed at midnight staring at the ceiling. Each time he'd pull up her number, hover his thumb over the call button, and then set the phone down like it was hot. Because calling meant continuing, continuing meant investing, and investing meant there was something to lose. On Monday morning, Danny cornered him before the first car even rolled into the bay. Well? Well, what? Don't do that. Don't act like you don't know what I'm asking. How was Friday? What happened? Did you embarrass yourself? Did she leave early? Did you use the wrong fork? Tell me everything. Mason pulled on his work gloves and slid under the Honda Accord that had been waiting since last Thursday. It was fine. Fine. He says fine. Danny crouched down next to the creeper. Mason, I have been working on this for 3 weeks. I've made phone calls. I've coordinated schedules. I have been a one-man dating service operating out of a garage that smells like brake cleaner. You owe me more than fine. It was good, Mason said from under the car. We talked. We ate. I paid a bill that's going to hurt for a while. She was not what I expected. Good, not what you expected, or bad, not what you expected. Mason was quiet for a moment. The wrench clicked against the oil pan bolt, and he wiped a drip off his forearm. Good, he said. Really good. Danny slapped the side of the creeper so hard, Mason flinched. I knew it. Karen owes me $20. She bet you'd bail before the appetizers. Your wife bet against me? She loves you, but she's realistic. Mason slid out and sat up, resting his arms on his knees. The garage was cold this morning, and his breath made little clouds. I haven't called her yet. Danny's grin faded. Why not? Because I don't know what I'm doing, Danny. I fix cars, I make PB&J sandwiches, I help with third-grade math homework that's somehow harder than anything I did in high school. That's my life. That's the whole list. And she runs a company that probably has its own zip code. So what do I say? Hey, Victoria, it's Mason, the guy who couldn't pronounce half the menu and whose truck has more rust than paint. Want to grab coffee at the place where I use coupons? Danny crossed his arms. Yeah, actually, that's exactly what you say, minus the self-pity. It's not self-pity. It's absolutely self-pity. You're a good man, Mason. You're a good father. You work harder than anyone I know. And if this woman can't see that, then she doesn't deserve the rust on your truck. Mason stared at the floor. Grease stains, tire marks, the ghost outlines of every car that had ever sat in this bay. He'd been staring at this same floor for 7 years. What if it doesn't work? He asked, and his voice was quieter than he meant it to be. Danny looked at him for a long time. What if it does? That afternoon, during his lunch break, Mason sat in his truck in the parking lot behind the shop and called Victoria Hale. She picked up on the second ring. Mason? She said his name like she'd been expecting the call but hadn't been sure it would come. There was noise behind her, voices, the hum of an office. Then a door closed and the noise cut off. Hey, sorry, is this a bad time? You sound busy. I'm always busy, it's fine. I just stepped into my office. You have an office you can step into that's already fancier than anything in my life. It has a window that faces another building's window. Sometimes the man in that office and I wave at each other. That's the extent of my social life during business hours. Mason laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than politeness. I wanted to call earlier. I just kept talking myself out of it. I know the feeling. I drafted 4 text messages and deleted all of them. What did they say? The first one was too formal. It sounded like a business email. The second was too casual. The third had an emoji, and I panicked and deleted the entire thing because I haven't used an emoji in a text since 2019. Which emoji? She paused. The slightly smiling face, the one that looks vaguely uncomfortable. That's the worst emoji. That's the emoji of someone being held at gunpoint and told to look happy. That's exactly how I feel when I text. They were both laughing now, and it felt easy, which was terrifying in its own way. Easy wasn't something Mason trusted. Easy was what things felt like right before they fell apart. But he stayed on the line anyway because the sound of her voice, stripped of the restaurant's candlelight and wine glasses, was somehow even better, more real, less performed. Listen, he said, and then stopped because he hadn't actually planned what came next. I'm listening. I want to see you again, and I know that sounds... I don't know, I'm not trying to be smooth or whatever. I don't have a plan. I don't have a fancy restaurant picked out. I just kept thinking about Friday. and I kept thinking about what you said about the maps, about not knowing where you're going, and I thought maybe that's okay, not knowing, as long as you're not standing still." The silence on her end lasted long enough to make him grip the steering wheel. "Are you still there?" he asked. "I'm here, I'm just... Nobody talks to me like that." "Like what?" "Like they actually mean it." He leaned back in the seat. The windshield crack caught the sunlight and split it into a jagged rainbow across the dashboard. "I mean it. I'm not sure what I mean exactly, but whatever it is, I mean it." Another pause. Then, "What are you doing Saturday?" His heart did something stupid. "Nothing. I mean, Ava has a soccer game at 10, but after that, nothing. I could meet you for coffee, somewhere without cloth napkins. I know a diner on Birch Street. They put the prices on the menu with dollar signs, like civilized people." "That sounds perfect." He hung up and sat in his truck for a full 2 minutes, staring at his phone like it might explode. Then he went back to work, and for the rest of the afternoon, he couldn't stop tapping his thumb against every surface he touched. Saturday morning was chaos. It was always chaos. Ava couldn't find her shin guards. One of her cleats was under the couch, the other was somehow in the bathroom. Her jersey had a grape juice stain from last week that Mason had forgotten to wash out, so she wore it inside out and told him it was a fashion choice. The soccer game was at Riverside Park, which was 10 minutes away but always took 20 because Mason could never remember which entrance led to the right field. Ava played midfield, which mostly meant she ran back and forth looking determined while the ball went in the opposite direction. She wasn't the best player on the team. She wasn't the worst. She was somewhere in the middle, which was fine with Mason because she loved it, and he'd drive her to 100 games in 100 parks as long as she kept loving it. He stood on the sideline with the other parents, hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee that had gone lukewarm. The other parents talked to each other in that easy, familiar way that Mason had never quite figured out. He knew their names. He waved. He made small talk about the weather and the referee's questionable calls. But he never quite fit in. The married couples had their own rhythm. The other single parents had their own support groups. Mason existed in the gaps between, present but separate, like a character standing at the edge of the frame. After the game, a 3-2 loss that Ava took with remarkable calm, he drove her home and called his mother. "I need a favor." "You need me to watch Ava." "How did you—" "Because you only call and say I need a favor when you need me to watch Ava. Is this about the woman?" "Her name is Victoria." "Is this about Victoria?" "We're getting coffee." "Coffee. That's good. Coffee is casual. Coffee says, I'm interested but not desperate." "When?" "In 2 hours." "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Wear the blue shirt again. It makes your eyes look less tired." "Thanks, Mom. Really boosting my confidence here." He showered and stood in front of his closet, which contained approximately 9 items, 3 of which were work shirts with the shop logo. He put on the blue button-down again because it was the only decent thing he owned, rolled the sleeves up to his forearms because the cuffs were slightly frayed and this hit it, and spent 4 minutes trying to decide if jeans were too casual before remembering that he didn't own anything else. Ava appeared in the doorway again. This was becoming a pattern. "Is this the same lady?" she asked. "Same lady." "Victoria." "That's her." Ava studied him. She was still in her soccer jersey, inside out, with grass stains on her knees and her hair escaping from its ponytail. "Do you like her?" The question was direct in the way only children's questions are. No subtext, no hedging, just the raw, unvarnished inquiry of a person who hadn't yet learned to be afraid of answers. "I think so," Mason said. "I'm still figuring it out." "That's okay. Sometimes you have to look at a drawing for a long time before you know if it's good." He smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't listen." He kissed the top of her head, grabbed his jacket, and walked out the door before she could see the way her words had landed on him. The diner on Birch Street was called Margie's, and it had been there since before Mason was born. Cracked vinyl booths, coffee that was decent but never great, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in 5 years but nobody bothered to remove because it looked right where it was. Mason had been coming here since high school, and the waitress Linda knew his order without asking. Victoria walked in at exactly 1 p.m. She was wearing jeans. He almost didn't recognize her. In the restaurant on Friday, she'd been polished, controlled, armored. Today she was wearing jeans and a gray sweater and boots that looked like they might have actually touched dirt at some point. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders. She looked like a different person. Or maybe, he thought, she looked like the same person without the costume. She spotted him in the back booth and slid in across from him, looked around, took in the cracked vinyl, the laminated menus, the napkin dispenser with the chrome peeling off. "This is great," she said, and he could tell she meant it. "Don't get too excited. The coffee's average at best." "I drink average coffee every day. My assistant buys me expensive coffee, and I pour it out when she's not looking because it tastes like burnt wood." Linda came over. Victoria ordered black coffee. Mason ordered the same, plus a piece of pie because he'd skipped lunch and his stomach was making noises that were going to be embarrassing if he didn't address them. "Apple or cherry?" Linda asked. "Apple." "Heated?" "Always." "Whipped cream?" "Linda, have I ever said no to whipped cream?" Linda looked at Victoria. "He has never said no to whipped cream, not once in 12 years. Victoria's mouth twitched. "Consistent." "Stubborn," Linda corrected, and walked away. The coffee came in thick ceramic mugs. Victoria wrapped her hands around hers and looked at Mason across the table. The diner light was harsh and unflattering, nothing like the candles at Marchetti's. It showed the lines around his eyes, the scar on his chin from a wrench that slipped 3 years ago, the rough patches on his knuckles that never fully healed no matter how much lotion his mother left on his bathroom counter. "Tell me about your week," she said. So he did. He told her about the transmission job that fell through and the new one that replaced it, about Danny's constant commentary, about Ava's science project on the water cycle that had involved 2 pots, a bag of ice, and a near disaster with boiling water that ended with both of them laughing on the kitchen floor. He told her about the fluorescent light in Bay 3 that he'd finally fixed, and about the motorcycle he was restoring in the garage, a 1972 Honda CB35. Oh, that he'd bought for $200 from an estate sale and had been slowly bringing back to life for the past 8 months. Victoria listened. Not the way people usually listen to him, politely, patiently, waiting for their turn to say something more interesting. She listened the way she probably listened in board meetings, with her full attention, her eyes tracking his words like she was filing them somewhere important. "Your turn," he said, when his pie was half gone and the coffee was on its second refill. Victoria stared into her mug. "My week was complicated." "Complicated how?" She took a breath, not a dramatic one, the kind of breath you take when you're deciding how much truth to let out. "I fired someone on Tuesday, a VP who'd been with the company for 4 years. He was leaking information to a competitor. I had the evidence, and it was clear, and it was the right decision, and I made it in 11 minutes. And then I went to my office and sat there for an hour feeling like I was going to throw up." "Because you felt bad?" "Because I didn't feel anything. That's what scared me. I made a decision that ended someone's career, and my first thought wasn't about him or his family or what he'd done. My first thought was, what does this do to our Q3 numbers? And I sat there in my office thinking, when did I become this? When did I start measuring everything in output and impact and never in human cost?" Mason set his fork down. He watched the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers pressed into the mug. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was looking for something harder to give, someone who would hear it without flinching. "You're not a bad person for being good at your job," he said. "Maybe not, but I might be a person who's forgotten how to be anything else. You're here, in a diner with sticky tables, drinking average coffee with a mechanic. That doesn't sound like someone who's forgotten." She looked up at him. There was something fragile in her expression, something that didn't match the CEO, the boardroom, the billion-dollar company. It matched the 12-year-old girl sitting alone in a school library pretending she wanted to be there. "My father called me this morning," she said. Mason waited. "We talk maybe twice a year, birthdays and holidays, very structured, very polite, very empty. He asked me how the company was doing, not how I was doing, the company. Like I'm just the person operating it, not a person who exists outside of it." "What did you tell him?" I gave him the numbers. Revenue up 12%. New product launch on track. Head count at 437. He said, "Good work," and hung up. The whole call lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes. I timed it. I always time them. I don't know why. Maybe because if I don't measure it, I'll convince myself it was longer, that it meant more than it did. Mason pushed the rest of his pie toward her. She looked at it. "Eat the pie," he said. "I didn't order pie." "Eat the pie, Victoria." She picked up his fork and took a bite. Then another. Then she looked at him with something close to bewilderment. "This is really good pie." "Margie's has good pie. The coffee's average, but the pie is excellent. There's a lesson in there somewhere." "What's the lesson?" "That nothing's all bad, not even a diner with sticky tables." She ate the rest of the pie and he ordered 2 more coffees, and they talked until Linda started giving them pointed looks, because the lunch crowd was arriving and they were taking up a foretop. Outside, the afternoon sun was weak and pale, filtering through clouds that couldn't decide whether to rain. They stood on the sidewalk in front of Margie's, and it felt different from Friday night, less charged, more real, like they'd crossed some invisible threshold between first date and whatever comes next. "I want to tell you something," Victoria said, "and I need you to hear it without trying to fix it." "Okay." "I don't know how to do this." She gestured between them. "This. Whatever this is. I know how to negotiate a merger. I know how to read a balance sheet. I know how to walk into a room of 50 investors and make them believe in something that doesn't exist yet. But I do not know how to stand on a sidewalk with a man who makes me feel—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. "I don't know how to do the part where you let someone see you, the real you. Not the version on the magazine cover or the keynote stage, the version who eats pie in diners and times her father's phone calls." Mason looked at her. The wind pulled a strand of hair across her face, and she pushed it back impatiently. "I'm not asking you to know how," he said. "I don't know how either. I've been alone for 6 years, Victoria. I've built an entire life around not needing anyone. And then my daughter put a drawing in my pocket, and you showed up in a restaurant, and now I'm standing outside a diner wondering what the hell I'm doing." "So what are we doing?" He recognized the question. She'd asked it at Marchetti's. He'd asked it back. It was becoming their refrain, 2 people circling the same uncertainty, neither willing to name it. "I think we're figuring it out," he said, slowly, badly, with a lot of awkward silences and too much coffee. "That sounds inefficient?" "Probably, but efficient is your thing. This is mine." "What's yours?" "Showing up, even when I don't know what I'm doing, even when the smart move is to walk away." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something he didn't expect. She stepped forward and put her arms around him. Not a romantic embrace, not a dramatic gesture, just a hug. The kind of hug that says, "I am tired of holding everything up by myself, and for 5 seconds, I'd like to stop." He felt her exhale against his shoulder, felt the tension in her back release by half an inch, and he put his arms around her and held on. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then she pulled back, straightened her sweater, and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and defiance. "I don't do that," she said. "Do what?" "Hug people. I don't hug people." "Okay." That was an anomaly. "Noted. Don't read into it." "I'm absolutely reading into it." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "I have to go. I have a call at 3. "On a Saturday? The markets in Singapore don't care about my weekends." He walked her to her car, a black sedan that was clean and understated and probably cost more than his house. She got in, started the engine, and then rolled down the window. "Mason, yeah, the pie really was good." "I know." She drove away and he stood in the parking lot of Margie's diner and watched until her car turned the corner and disappeared. Then he walked to his truck, sat behind the cracked windshield, and called Danny. "She hugged me," he said. "Who? Victoria? She hugged you?" "In front of the diner, voluntarily." "Mason Carter, you absolute disaster of a human being. You've done it." "Done what?" "Made a billionaire CEO hug you outside a place that serves $3 coffee. That's the most you think that has ever happened." Mason hung up on him, but he was smiling when he did it. At home, Ava was on the living room floor surrounded by drawings. Not her usual drawings, but these were more deliberate, more careful. She was working on something specific, her tongue poking out the side of her mouth the way it did when she was concentrating hard. Hey, Bug, what are you making? Nothing. That's a lot of paper for nothing. She covered the drawing with her arm. It's a surprise. For who? For later. He knew better than to push. Ava's surprises operated on their own timeline, and pressing her only made them take longer. He went to the kitchen and started dinner, spaghetti, because it was the one meal he could make without consulting a recipe or burning something. His mother was putting on her coat by the front door. She paused and looked at him with that expression she had, the one that was part curiosity, part concern, part the particular intensity of a woman who had raised a son alone after his father died, and therefore considered herself an expert on solitude. How is coffee? She asked. Good. Good like fine, or good like good? Good like I want to see her again. Patricia Carter nodded slowly. She buttoned her coat and picked up her purse. Be careful, Mason. Mom, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be careful. You've been on your own a long time. And so has she, from what it sounds like. Two people who've been alone that long, they've got sharp edges. They're not aware of them because they've never had to be. But when you get close to someone, those edges find each other. You're really selling this. I'm being honest, which is what mothers do when they're terrified their sons are about to get hurt. She kissed his cheek and left. Mason stood in the kitchen stirring spaghetti sauce and thinking about sharp edges. She wasn't wrong. He had edges. Years of doing everything alone had made him rigid in ways he didn't always see. He had his routines, his systems, his precise way of managing every minute of every day. Ava's schedule, the shop's schedule, the bills, the groceries, the parent-teacher conferences. It all ran on a machine he'd built out of necessity, and the machine didn't leave room for variables. Victoria was a variable, a massive, unpredictable, terrifying variable. Daddy, Ava called from the living room. Yeah. Is Victoria nice? He stopped stirring. Yeah, Bug. She's nice. Good nice or pretend nice? What's pretend nice? Like Mrs. Hargrove at school, she smiles at parents, but she yells at kids when the parents leave. That's pretend nice. Mason walked to the doorway and leaned against the frame. Ava was still on the floor, still covering her drawing. Victoria is good nice, I think. You think? I'm still learning her. You don't know someone all at once. It takes time. Like a book. You have to read more than one page. Exactly like a book. Ava considered this. Is she lonely? The question hit him the same way it had when she'd written it on the drawing, clean and sharp and impossible to dodge. I think she has been. For a long time. Like you? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm not lonely, Ava. I have you. She looked at him with those green eyes, her mother's eyes, the only thing Jenna had left behind, and the look said very clearly, I'm 8, not stupid. You can have me and still be lonely, she said. That's allowed. He didn't know what to say to that, so he went back to the kitchen and stirred the sauce and let her words sit in his chest like a stone he couldn't swallow and couldn't spit out. They ate dinner at the kitchen table. Spaghetti with too much garlic, salad from a bag, and bread rolls that Mason had bought 3 days ago and were just this side of stale. Ava ate with the focus of someone who treated food as fuel for whatever creative project was consuming her brain. She twirled spaghetti around her fork with mechanical precision and stared at nothing, clearly thinking about something else entirely. Daddy. Can I meet her? The fork slipped from his fingers and clattered against the plate. What? Victoria. Can I meet her? You went out twice. You're going to go out again because you're smiling more. I want to meet her. Ava, it's really early. You just said you have to read more than one page. I haven't even opened the book yet. That's not fair. The logic was flawless, which was the problem with arguing with Ava. She didn't fight with emotion. She fought with reason, and her reason was almost always better than his. Let me think about it, he said. That means no. That means let me think about it. She went back to her spaghetti, unconvinced. That night, after Ava was asleep, Mason sat on the back porch with a beer. The yard was small. just a patch of grass and a chain-link fence, and the garage where the Honda CB350 sat in pieces on the workbench. The motorcycle was maybe 60% done. He'd been working on it for 8 months, and sometimes he thought he was dragging it out on purpose because the project gave him something to do with his hands during the hours after Ava went to bed and before exhaustion knocked him out. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. "I told my sister about you." He stared at it, then typed back, "What did you tell her?" "That I met a man who made me eat pie at a diner. She said that was the most normal thing I've done in 5 years. Glad I could help with your normality index. She wants to meet you. I told her to slow down. My daughter wants to meet you. I told her the same thing." A pause. Then, "Are we both being told to slow down by the people who know us best?" "Looks like it." "And are we going to listen?" Mason took a sip of his beer. The night was cold, and the stars were out, and somewhere down the street a dog was barking at nothing. He thought about what his mother had said, about sharp edges, about two people who'd been alone so long they'd forgotten how to make room. He thought about Victoria standing in the diner, admitting she didn't know how to let someone see her. He thought about Ava asking if Victoria was good nice or pretend nice. He thought about a 12-year-old girl sitting alone in a library and a 7-year-old sister who slid a drawing under her door. "Probably not," he typed back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Good," she wrote, "because I don't think I can." He set the phone down on the porch railing and finished his beer. The dog down the street stopped barking. The garage light was off, and the motorcycle sat in the dark, half-finished, waiting for hands that knew how to put broken things back together. Mason went inside, checked on Ava one more time. She was asleep with Mr. Buttons and 3 colored pencils still clutched in her fist, and went to bed. He lay in the dark and let himself think the thought he'd been avoiding all week. The dangerous thought. The one that had been building since Friday night at Marchetti's and had only gotten louder since the diner, since the hug, since the text messages that came at odd hours and always said more than their words contained. He was falling for her. Not smoothly, not gracefully, not the way it happened in movies where 2 people locked eyes across a room and everything clicked into place like a puzzle. This was messy, clumsy, full of wrong turns and awkward silences and the constant grinding fear that he was about to ruin the only good thing that had happened to him in 6 years. But it was happening, whether he was ready or not. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment with antique maps on the walls and a sister's drawing tucked in a coat pocket, Victoria Hale was lying awake too. He was sure of it. Not because of any romantic intuition, but because lonely people know the sound of each other's sleeplessness, even from miles away, even through walls and silence and all the careful distance they've built to keep the world from getting too close. Mason closed his eyes. The house on Chestnut Street was quiet. The fluorescent light above Bay 3 was fixed. The cracked windshield still needed replacing. And somewhere in his daughter's bedroom, buried under drawings and colored pencils and the soft weight of a sleeping child's imagination, was a picture of a house with 3 figures standing in front of it. Not 2. 3. 2 weeks. That's how long Mason held the line. 2 weeks of phone calls that started with, "I only have a minute," and ended an hour later. 2 weeks of text messages at odd hours. Victoria sending him photos of terrible corporate art in her office building. Who approved this? It looks like a sneeze. Mason sending her pictures of engine parts she couldn't identify. That's either a carburetor or a medieval torture device. 2 weeks of coffee at Margie's on Saturday afternoons, where Linda had started bringing 2 slices of apple pie without being asked and leaving the check face down like she was protecting a secret. 2 weeks of Ava asking every single night, "Can I meet her yet?" It was a Wednesday evening when Mason finally broke. He was sitting at the kitchen table helping Ava with a book report on Charlotte's Web while simultaneously trying to figure out how a 3rd grader was expected to analyze literary themes when most adults he knew couldn't do it. Ava was chewing on the end of her pencil, which he'd told her 1,000 times not to do, and staring at the blank notebook page like it owed her money. "Daddy?" Write the first sentence. Any sentence. Just start. "Daddy?" "What?" "When can I meet Victoria?" He put down his own pencil. She wasn't going to let this go. She'd been asking with increasing frequency and decreasing patience, and the look on her face had shifted from curious to determined to something that was starting to resemble hurt, as if his refusal to introduce them was a judgment on her, like he didn't trust her to handle it, or like she wasn't important enough to be included. "Why is this so important to you?" he asked. Ava set her pencil down carefully. She did this when she was about to say something she'd been thinking about for a while. It was her tell, the way she organized her thoughts before releasing them, like arranging dominoes in a line. "Because you're different," she said. "Different how?" "You hum now. When you're cooking, you never used to do that. And you check your phone and smile. And last week you fixed the shelf in the bathroom that's been broken for like a year. You're doing things again, like you woke up." Mason stared at his daughter, 8 years old, grass stains on her jeans from recess, a pencil with teeth marks. And she'd just described his emotional state with more precision than he could manage himself. "If she makes you hum," Ava said, "I want to know her." He didn't have an argument for that. He didn't even have a deflection. So he picked up his phone right there at the kitchen table with Ava watching and sent Victoria a message. "Ava wants to meet you. Are you ready for that?" The response came fast, faster than usual. "No, but I don't think readiness is the point anymore." "Saturday? There's a park by the lake. Ava likes it there." "Saturday works. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And maybe lower your expectations. She's going to ask you a lot of questions." "I run a company with 400 employees. I can handle questions from an 8-year-old. "You say that now." He put the phone down and looked at Ava. "Saturday. Lakeview Park. After your soccer game." The smile that broke across her face was so wide and so sudden that it almost hurt to look at. She jumped off her chair, threw her arms around his neck, and squeezed with a force that seemed impossible for someone who weighed 53 pounds. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. Finish your book report first. Charlotte dies, and it's sad, but she lives on through her babies. Theme: love means doing things for people even when it costs you. Can I go pick out what I'm wearing on Saturday?" "It's Wednesday." "Planning takes time, Daddy." She was gone before he could respond, thundering down the hallway toward her bedroom with the energy of someone who'd just been given the best news of her life. Mason sat at the kitchen table, alone with 2 pencils and an unfinished book report, and tried to figure out how a moment could feel so right and so terrifying at the same time. He called Victoria that night after Ava was asleep. She picked up immediately, and he could hear the change in her voice, a tightness that hadn't been there before. She was nervous. Victoria Hale, who negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions and testified in front of Senate committees, was nervous about meeting an 8-year-old girl at a park. "What is she like?" Victoria asked. "I need data." "She's not a market segment, Victoria." "I know that. I'm asking because I don't want to show up and have nothing to talk about. What are her interests? What does she care about? What's the current landscape of her? I'm doing it again, aren't I?" "You're doing a competitor analysis on my daughter." "Old habits." Mason leaned back on the porch. The night was warmer than the last few weeks, early spring finally pushing through. "She draws, constantly. Everything goes into her sketchbook. She reads anything she can get her hands on. She likes soccer, but she's not great at it, and she doesn't care. She asks questions that make adults uncomfortable. She has a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons that she pretends she doesn't still sleep with, but absolutely does." "What kind of questions?" "Big ones. Why do people leave? What's the point of working if you're tired all the time? Do fish know they're in water? That kind of thing." "Do fish know they're in water?" I told her probably not. She said that was sad. I thought about it for 3 days. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Mason, what if she doesn't like me?" The vulnerability in the question was so stark that he had to close his eyes. This was the woman who'd built a tech empire from a dorm room, who'd been on the cover of Forbes, who'd fired a VP without flinching, and she was afraid of a third grader's opinion. "Then she doesn't like you," he said, "and that would be hard. But it wouldn't change how I feel about you." The silence stretched. He could hear her breathing. "How do you feel about me?" she asked. He'd been avoiding this, they both had. They danced around it for 2 weeks, letting the coffee dates and the text messages and the long phone calls say what neither of them would. But the question was there now, hanging in the air between them like something dropped from a high shelf. Too late to catch, too fragile to ignore. "Scared." he said. That's how I feel. Scared and hopeful and confused and about 18 other things I can't name because I've been out of practice for 6 years. But mostly, I feel like I spent a very long time convincing myself that my life was fine the way it was, and then you showed up and now I can see all the places where it wasn't. That's either very romantic or very depressing. It's both. Welcome to dating a single dad, Mason. Yeah, I feel that way too. All of it. The scared part especially. Good. Misery loves company. That's terrible. I'm a mechanic, not a poet. She laughed, a real one, warm and unguarded, the kind she only let out when she forgot to control it. He held on to the sound of it the way you hold on to something you're afraid will be taken away. Saturday came the way important days always come. Too fast and too slow at the same time. Ava was up at 6, which was 2 hours earlier than she needed to be, laying out outfit options on her bed with the seriousness of a general planning a military campaign. She'd narrowed it down to 3 combinations and was deliberating between them when Mason walked past her door with his coffee. The yellow shirt, he said without stopping. Why? Because it's your favorite and you shouldn't wear something you don't love just to impress someone. She considered this, held up the yellow shirt, and nodded. Good advice. The soccer game was at Riverside Park again. Another loss. 4-1 this time, with Ava's team looking more confused than usual. She came off the field with dirt on her face and a scrape on her elbow, and the unbothered expression of someone who had bigger things on her mind. Can we go now? She asked, before Mason could even hand her the water bottle. Don't you want to change? She looked down at herself. Soccer jersey, grass-stained shorts, one sock higher than the other. No, this is what I look like. Mason couldn't argue with that. Lakeview Park sat on the eastern edge of town, a long stretch of grass sloping down to a man-made lake that wasn't beautiful but was calm, which was close enough. There was a playground on the north end and a row of benches along the water where old men fished for bass they never caught. Mason had been bringing Ava here since she was small enough to carry, and it was the one place in the world where both of them could breathe without effort. They got there first. Ava sat on a bench near the water and pulled her sketchbook from the backpack she'd insisted on bringing. Mason stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, scanning the parking lot with the casual anxiety of someone waiting for a bomb to either detonate or turn out to be a clock. Relax, Ava said, without looking up. I'm relaxed. Your jaw is doing that thing. What thing? The thing where you clench it so hard I can hear your teeth from here. He unclenched his jaw, sat down next to her, tried to look at the lake. The water was gray-green and still, reflecting the overcast sky. A man on the far bank was casting a line with the patient boredom of someone who'd accepted that the fish weren't coming. At 12:15, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Mason watched Victoria get out of the car. She was wearing jeans again, the same ones from the diner, or maybe different ones, he couldn't tell, and a navy blue jacket over a white shirt. She stood by her car for a moment, adjusting her jacket, running a hand through her hair, stalling. He recognized the gesture because he did the same thing every time he sat in his truck outside Marchetti's or Margie's, working up the nerve to walk in. She saw them, raised a hand, walked over. Ava closed her sketchbook and stood up. She was watching Victoria the way she watched everything, with that careful, measuring intensity that made adults uncomfortable. Not judging, just reading, taking it all in before forming a conclusion. Victoria stopped about 5 feet away. Not too close. Not too far. The distance of someone who understood that trust was earned, not assumed. Hi, Victoria said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She had them clasped in front of her, and Mason could see her fingers pressing into each other. Hi, Ava said. Nobody moved. Mason opened his mouth to say something, anything, to break the silence, but Ava beat him to it. My dad says you collect old maps. Victoria blinked. He told you that? He tells me everything. Well, not everything. He doesn't tell me how much things cost because he thinks I'll worry, but he tells me the important stuff. Yes. I collect old maps, antique ones. Why? Because they show you what people didn't know yet. Ava tilted her head. Processing. Like how they didn't know California was connected to the rest of the country? Exactly like that. Some old maps show California as an island. That's a big mistake. It is. But they didn't know it was a mistake. They were working with incomplete information and doing their best. Ava looked at her for a long moment. Then she sat back down on the bench and opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. Do you want to sit down? There's room. Victoria sat. Not next to Ava. She left a gap between them, a careful, respectful distance. Mason stood a few feet away, leaning against a tree, watching. His chest was tight. Every instinct in his body was on alert, the way it always was when someone new entered Ava's orbit. He'd spent 6 years being the gatekeeper, the filter, the wall between his daughter and a world that had already failed her once. Watching Victoria sit on that bench felt like watching someone walk through a door he'd spent years keeping locked. What are you drawing? Victoria asked. The lake. Can I see? Ava tilted the sketchbook toward her. The drawing was rough but specific. She'd captured the slope of the bank, the uneven line of trees on the far shore. The man fishing with his rod bent at exactly the right angle. For an 8-year-old, it was remarkable. Not in the prodigy sense, in the attention sense. She saw things and put them down on paper with an honesty that most adults had trained out of themselves. You're good, Victoria said, not in the patronizing way adults usually complimented children's art. In the flat, factual way she probably said, good work, in board meetings. A genuine assessment. I practice a lot, Ava said. Daddy says that's how you get good at things, practice and patience. He says that about cars, too. He fixes cars. He fixes everything. The sink, the porch, my bike chain, the toaster. He tried to fix the dishwasher once, but it got worse and we had to call a real repair person. He doesn't talk about that. Mason, from his spot by the tree, muttered, the dishwasher had a design flaw. The dishwasher had a daddy flaw, Ava corrected, and Victoria made a sound that might have been a laugh, but was covered by her hand. They sat in silence for a while. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind that comes when people are sharing a space without feeling the need to fill it with noise. Ava drew. Victoria watched the lake. Mason stood by his tree and let the knot in his chest loosen, degree by degree. After about 10 minutes, Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook and a pencil. Mason hadn't expected that. He watched as she opened the notebook to a blank page and started sketching. Not the lake, not the trees. She was drawing Ava. Her hand moved differently than Ava's. More precise, more controlled. The lines were clean and confident. She drew the profile of the girl on the bench. The messy ponytail, the soccer jersey, the concentration on her face, the way her sneakers dangled above the ground because she was too short for her feet to reach. Ava noticed. She stopped drawing the lake and looked over. Is that me? Is that okay? Ava studied the sketch. It was good. Genuinely good. Victoria had captured something in the lines that photography couldn't. The specificity of how Ava sat, the angle of her chin, the particular way she held her pencil between her second and third fingers instead of between her first and second. You draw, Ava said, with the amazement of someone discovering a kindred species. I used to. In college. I was an art major for 1 semester before I switched to computer science. Why did you switch? Victoria's pencil stopped moving. My father said art wasn't practical. Was he right? He was practical. That's not the same as right. Ava looked at her for a long time. Then she picked up her own sketchbook and tore out a fresh page, carefully along the perforated edge, and placed it between them on the bench. Draw something else, she said. What should I draw? Anything. Drawing is better when someone does it with you. Victoria looked at the blank page, then at Ava, then at the lake. She picked up her pencil and started drawing the same view Ava had been working on. The slope, the water, the fisherman, but from her own angle, with her own hand, in her own style. Ava leaned over to watch, and slowly, without discussion, they fell into a rhythm. Ava drew the trees. Victoria drew the water. Ava added birds that looked more like check marks than birds. Victoria added shadows that gave the flat scene depth. Mason watched from the tree. His throat was thick. He swallowed against it and looked away for a moment, at the parking lot, at the sky. at anything that wasn't his daughter and this woman sitting side by side in comfortable silence, creating something together without trying to. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. Mason lost track because he was caught in that strange suspended state where time moves differently, where a moment stretches not because it's slow, but because it matters too much to rush through. Then Ava did something that made Mason's heart stop. She picked up her pencil and, on Victoria's drawing, not her own but Victoria's, she carefully drew a figure next to the lake. A small figure. A girl. Standing by the water with a sketchbook in her hand, Victoria watched her do it, didn't stop her, didn't redirect her, just watched. Then Ava pointed at the space next to the figure. "You need to add someone here." "Who?" "You." Victoria looked at the drawing, at the small figure Ava had added, at the empty space beside it. Slowly, carefully, she drew a second figure, taller. Standing next to the first, two people by a lake sketched in pencil on a piece of paper torn from an 8-year-old sketchbook. Ava studied it, nodded. "Better." "Why better?" "Because she's not standing there alone anymore." Victoria's hand stopped moving. The pencil rested on the page, and Mason could see from where he stood that her fingers were trembling. Not a lot, just enough. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Neither did Ava. The fisherman on the far bank reeled in his empty line and cast it out again. The wind picked up, rippling the surface of the lake, and a few leaves skittered across the grass. "I used to stand alone a lot," Victoria said quietly. She wasn't talking to Ava exactly. She wasn't talking to Mason either. She was talking to the drawing, to the two figures by the water, to whatever place inside herself the image had unlocked. "When I was your age, a little older, I'd go to the park near our house and just stand there. Not playing, not doing anything, just standing. Because at least in the park, being alone felt like a choice. At home it didn't." Ava didn't respond right away. She finished shading a tree in her own drawing, taking her time, giving Victoria the space to exist in her own words without interruption. "I'm alone a lot too," Ava said eventually. "But I have my dad, so it's different." "That's a big difference." "I know. He tries really hard, sometimes too hard. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. He stays up late worrying about stuff. I can hear him walking around the house at night." Mason, by the tree, felt something crack open in his chest. He hadn't known she heard him. All those late nights pacing the kitchen, running numbers, trying to figure out how to stretch a paycheck across a month that was always 3 days too long. He'd thought she was asleep. He'd thought the walls were thick enough. They weren't. They never are. "Parents do that," Victoria said. "Do your parents worry about you?" The question was innocent. The answer wasn't. "My parents worry about the company," Victoria said. "That's sort of the same thing, in their minds." "But not in yours?" Victoria looked at Ava, really looked at her, with the full attention she usually reserved for spreadsheets and strategy meetings. "No, not in mine." Ava nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then she flipped to a new page in her sketchbook and started a different drawing. This one was faster, less detailed. A house, a yard, 3 figures in front. The same 3 figures Mason had seen in her notebook that first night. "That's us," Ava said simply. "You, me, and Daddy." Victoria stared at the drawing. Then she looked up at Mason, who was standing by the tree with his hands in his pockets and his jaw clenched and his eyes bright with something he didn't want to name in front of his daughter. "Ava," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Bug, It's just a drawing," Ava said. "I draw lots of things. I drew a dragon last week. Doesn't mean dragons are real." But they both knew it wasn't just a drawing. It was the same thing as the stick figures holding hands, the same thing as the note that said, "Maybe she's lonely too." It was Ava's way of saying what she wanted without risking the vulnerability of saying it out loud. She drew her wishes because wishes on paper felt safer than wishes spoken into the air. Mason walked over to the bench. He sat down on Ava's other side so that she was between them. His daughter, their bridge, the small, fierce person who had seen what neither adult could admit and had simply drawn it into existence. "It's a good drawing, Bug," he said. "I know," she said. "The proportions are off on the house, but I'll fix it later." They sat there, the three of them, on a bench by a lake that wasn't beautiful but was calm. The fisherman gave up and packed his gear. A jogger passed behind them, headphones in, oblivious. Clouds moved across the sky in slow formations that looked like nothing and everything. After a while, Ava announced she was hungry and wanted hot dogs from the cart near the playground. Mason gave her $5, and she took off running across the grass with the focused determination of someone on a critical mission, which left Mason and Victoria alone on the bench. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "She's a kid." "She's an extraordinary kid." "Yeah." He watched Ava join the line at the hot dog cart, bouncing on her toes. "She scares me sometimes. The things she sees, the things she says. I keep waiting for the world to take that away from her, and I keep trying to figure out how to stop it. You can't stop it. I know. That's the part that keeps me up at night." Victoria was still holding the drawing, the one with the two figures by the lake. She ran her thumb along the edge of the paper. "She drew me into the picture, Mason." "I saw." "Nobody draws me into pictures. Nobody ever has. I don't know. I'm always the one looking at the picture from outside, the one holding the frame." "She sees you, Victoria." "How? She's known me for an hour." "And an hour of watching you draw beside her without trying to control the conversation, without talking about yourself, without performing. You just sat there and drew. That's the thing about kids. They don't care about your resume. They care about whether you show up. You showed up." Victoria pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. Mason was learning that about her. She carried her emotions right up to the edge and then held them there, on the brink, never letting them spill over. Years of practice. Years of sitting in rooms where tears were a weakness and vulnerability was a flaw. "My sister would love her," Victoria said. "Lily?" "She's a second-grade teacher in Portland. She calls me every Sunday and asks the same question. 'Have you done anything that made you happy this week?' I usually lie. This week I wouldn't have to." "What would you tell her?" "That I sat by a lake and drew pictures with an 8-year-old, and it was the best hour I've had in months." Ava came back with 2 hot dogs smothered in mustard and ketchup and a glob of relish that was already sliding off the bun. She handed one to Mason without asking if he wanted it, because she knew he always wanted a hot dog when they were at the park, and sat back down on the bench between them. "Victoria," she said between bites. "Yes." "Do you want to come to my soccer game next week?" Mason started to say something, a gentle intervention, a suggestion to slow down, the parental instinct to manage expectations, but Victoria answered before he could. "I'd like that," she said. Ava nodded like this was the only acceptable answer, and went back to eating. A streak of ketchup appeared on her chin, and Mason reached over with a napkin, and she dodged it with the practiced agility of a child who considered napkins a personal insult. They stayed at the park for another hour. Ava played on the swings for a while, and Mason and Victoria sat on the bench and talked about small things: the motorcycle, the office window, and the waving neighbor, Danny's ongoing campaign to take credit for their entire relationship. They didn't talk about what Ava's drawing meant, or what Victoria's trembling hand said, or what the fact that they were sitting on this bench together implied about a future neither of them had the courage to name. Those conversations would come, but not today. Today was for hot dogs and lake water and an 8-year-old girl who drew people into pictures because she wanted them to stay. When it was time to leave, Ava hugged Victoria. It wasn't planned. It wasn't prompted. She just turned to her, opened her arms, and hugged her around the waist with the full, uncomplicated trust that children offer like a gift they don't know the value of. Victoria froze for a second. Mason saw it. The stiffness, the surprise, the split-second calculation of someone who didn't know what to do with physical affection that hadn't been scheduled or prepared for. Then her arms came down, slowly, carefully, and she held the child against her the way you hold something you've just been told is yours, but you're not sure you deserve. "Bye, Victoria," Ava said, pulling away. "See you next Saturday." "See you next Saturday." Ava ran toward the truck. Mason stood facing Victoria in the parking lot, the late afternoon sun throwing long shadows across the gravel. "She hugged you," he said. "She hugged me." Ava doesn't hug people. She's very selective about physical contact. It took her pediatrician 2 years to earn a high five. Victoria looked toward the truck where Ava was already climbing into the back seat. I don't know what I did to earn that. You drew with her. That's all. You sat beside her and drew. That can't be enough. It was exactly enough. They stood there for a moment. The parking lot was almost empty. The sun was getting low, painting the clouds orange at the edges. Victoria reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the folded drawing, the one from the restaurant, the stick figures holding hands, the words Ava had written in wobbly crayon. I've been carrying this every day, she said, since you gave it to me. Every single day. I take it out of one jacket and put it in the next. I don't know why. Because it's real, Mason said. Because an 8-year-old saw you without all the armor and liked what she saw. And maybe that means more than any board meeting or Forbes article or quarterly earnings call. Maybe that's the thing that actually counts. Victoria folded the drawing and put it back in her pocket, next to the old one from Lily. 2 drawings from 2 children, years and miles apart, both saying the same thing in crayon and colored pencil. You don't have to be alone. I'll see you Saturday, she said. You'll see us Saturday. She got in her car and drove away. Mason walked to the truck, where Ava was already buckled in with her sketchbook open on her lap, adding details to the drawing of 3 figures standing in front of a house. The proportions are still off on the house, she muttered. Looks pretty good to me, Bug. That's because you don't understand proportions. He started the truck. The engine turned over with the familiar shudder that meant the starter was going to need replacing soon. Another thing on the list that never got shorter. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward Chestnut Street. Daddy? Yeah. I like her. 2 words, 3 syllables. The most important review of his life, delivered from the back seat by a girl with ketchup on her chin and grass stains on her knees. Yeah, Bug, he said, watching her in the rearview mirror. I like her too. Ava went back to her drawing. Mason drove home. The truck rattled over a pothole, and the rearview mirror shook, and the crack in the windshield caught the last of the afternoon light and scattered it across the dashboard. At home that night, after dinner and bath time and the nightly negotiation over how many chapters of her book Ava could read before lights out, Mason sat on the edge of her bed and pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. Mr. Buttons was in his usual spot, tucked under her arm. Her sketchbook was on the nightstand, open to the drawing she'd been working on all day. Daddy, she said, her voice already soft with approaching sleep. Victoria's hands shake. He paused. What? When she was drawing, her hands shook a little bit, not a lot, just sometimes, when she thought nobody was looking. Mason looked at his daughter. Her eyes were half closed, the green fading behind heavy lids. What do you think that means? He asked. I think it means she's scared, like you are. But she's doing it anyway. Ava yawned. That's brave. He sat there after her eyes closed. Sat there in the blue glow of the moon nightlight, listening to her breathe, and thought about what bravery looked like when you stripped away the Hollywood version. Not swords and battles and speeches, just 2 people with shaking hands choosing to sit on a bench together. Just a man with a cracked windshield calling a woman who ran a billion-dollar company and saying, I want to see you again. Just a child who drew people into pictures because she believed they should be there. He leaned down and kissed Ava's forehead. She smelled like soap and grass and the specific sweetness of a child who'd spent the day outdoors. Night, Bug, he whispered. He stood up and walked to the door, paused, looked back at the sketchbook on the nightstand. 3 figures in front of a house. The proportions were off. The house was too small and the people were too big and the sky was the wrong shade of blue. But everyone was there. Everyone was accounted for. And that, Mason thought, was the only proportion that mattered. Victoria came to the soccer game. She showed up 10 minutes early, which Mason would later learn was how she showed up to everything. Early enough to assess the environment, late enough that she didn't look desperate. She parked her black sedan in the gravel lot at Riverside Park between a minivan with a cracked bumper sticker that said, Soccer Mom Fuel equals coffee, and a pickup truck that made Mason's look luxurious by comparison. She got out wearing jeans, sneakers, and a jacket that probably cost more than every other piece of clothing in the parking lot combined. But she'd left her hair down and she wasn't wearing makeup, and she stood at the edge of the field with her hands jammed in her pockets, like someone who'd been dropped into a foreign country and was trying to figure out the customs. Mason saw her before she saw him. He was standing on the sideline with his thermos next to a dad named Greg, who sold insurance and always wanted to talk about his boat. And for a moment, Mason just watched her. Watched the way she scanned the field, found Ava among the mass of small bodies in matching jerseys, and then scanned the sideline until she found him. The relief on her face when their eyes met was so visible that Greg noticed. "Friend of yours?" Greg asked. "Yeah," Mason said. "Something like that." Victoria walked over. The other parents noticed her the way people always notice someone who doesn't quite belong. Not hostile, just curious. The suburban ecosystem of Saturday soccer games had its own social structure, and Victoria was clearly from a different habitat. "You made it," Mason said. "I said I would." "I know. I just wasn't sure you meant it." "I always mean what I say. It's one of my more exhausting qualities." He handed her his thermos. "Coffee. It's bad, but it's warm." She took a sip and made a face that she immediately tried to hide. "That's terrible." "I warned you." "You said bad. This is criminal. What did you do to these beans?" "I used the coffee maker from 2014 that I've never cleaned properly." "That tracks." On the field, Ava spotted Victoria and waved with her whole arm, nearly colliding with a teammate in the process. Victoria waved back, a small, careful wave, like she was afraid of doing it wrong. Mason bit the inside of his cheek to keep from smiling. The game started. It was the usual controlled chaos, 15 8-year-olds chasing a ball across a field that was slightly too big for them, with coaches on both sides shouting instructions that nobody followed. Ava played her heart out, which meant she ran in the wrong direction twice, accidentally kicked the ball toward her own goal once, and executed one genuinely beautiful pass that led to a goal and made Mason yell so loud that Greg flinched. Victoria watched with an intensity that surprised him. She didn't pretend to understand the game. She'd told him on the phone that she'd never watched a soccer match in her life. But she watched Ava specifically, tracking her movements, her expressions, the way she recovered after mistakes without dwelling on them. "She doesn't get upset when she messes up," Victoria observed at halftime. "No, she never has. She just moves on. I don't know where she gets that from. Definitely not me." "What do you do when you mess up?" "Replay it in my head for approximately 6 years. "Same." They stood together on the sideline, and it felt normal, dangerously normal, like she'd always been there holding his terrible coffee, squinting against the morning sun, watching his daughter play a sport she didn't understand. Some of the other parents glanced over. One of the moms, Lisa, who ran the team's group chat with military efficiency, gave Mason a look that was part surprise and part approval. He pretended not to see it. Ava's team won 2-1. Ava hadn't scored either goal, but she'd made that one assist and she'd played hard, and she came running off the field with her face red and her ponytail demolished and went straight to Victoria. "Did you see my pass?" she demanded. "I saw it. It was impressive." "It was okay. I should have angled it more to the left, but Sarah was open, so I just went for it." Sometimes going for it is the right call, even if the angle isn't perfect. Ava looked at her with that expression, the one that said she was filing something away for later use. "That sounds like it's about more than soccer." "It might be. Adults always do that. They say one thing and mean another thing. It's confusing." "You're right. It is confusing. I'll try to be more direct." "Good. Can we get pancakes?" Mason looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Mason. "Pancakes?" he offered. "I haven't had pancakes in probably 3 years." "That's a tragedy." "My nutritionist would disagree." "Your nutritionist isn't invited." They went to a place called Flapjacks, which was 2 miles from the park, and had been serving breakfast to the youth soccer crowd for as long as anyone could remember. It was loud, sticky, and smelled like maple syrup and burnt butter. Ava ordered chocolate chip pancakes. Mason ordered eggs and toast. Victoria ordered a short stack and ate the whole thing with a focus that suggested she hadn't been lying about the 3-year pancake drought. "This is so good," Victoria said in a tone that bordered on reverent. "Why is this so good?" "Because it's not healthy," Ava explained. "Unhealthy food always tastes better, that's the rule." Who made that rule? Science. I don't think that's science. It's Ava science, Mason said. She has her own branch. The findings are non-negotiable. Victoria laughed. Not her careful laugh, her real one, the one that came out before she could catch it. Two men at the next table glanced over. A waitress carrying a tray of orange juice smiled at the sound of it. Mason watched the laugh change Victoria's whole face, softening lines he hadn't realized were there, and he felt that familiar ache in his chest that he'd been carrying around since the night at Marchetti's, the one that told him he was in too deep to climb out. After breakfast, Ava asked if Victoria wanted to see the motorcycle. Mason hesitated. The motorcycle was in his garage. His garage was at his house. His house was on Chestnut Street, which was small and cluttered and had a kitchen faucet that dripped and a front porch with a board that creaked and approximately none of the elegance that Victoria's life presumably contained. Bringing her there felt like showing her the full picture, not just the presentable parts, the Saturday coffee dates, and the restaurant dinners, but the reality, the worn carpet, the mismatched furniture, the life of a man who made $42,000 a year and spent most of it on a little girl who deserved more than he could give. But Ava had already asked, and Victoria had already said yes, and the truck was already pulling onto Chestnut Street before Mason could manufacture a reason to detour. The house looked exactly like what it was, a rental. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room that doubled as Ava's art studio, and a kitchen where the oven only worked if you jiggled the dial in a specific way that Mason had long ago mastered and couldn't explain. The yard was mowed but bare. The porch light was burnt out. The front door stuck in the frame and required a shoulder check to open, which Mason performed with the practiced ease of someone who'd been body-checking his own front door for 4 years. "Welcome to the palace," he said, holding the door open. He heard the self-deprecation in his voice and hated it, but couldn't stop it. This was the part he'd been dreading, not the conversations or the coffee or the park. This, the moment she saw where he actually lived. Victoria stepped inside. She looked around the living room, the couch with the sagging middle cushion, the bookshelf overflowing with Ava's library books, and Mason's dog-eared paperbacks, the walls covered in Ava's drawings, taped up without frames because frames cost money. The coffee table had a ring stain from a mug that Mason had been meaning to clean for a month. The TV remote was held together with electrical tape. Mason waited for the reaction. The polite nod. The carefully neutral face. The moment when the distance between their worlds became too large to pretend away. "I love it," Victoria said. He blinked. "What?" "I love it." She was looking at the drawings on the wall, dozens of them. Trees, animals, houses, people, abstract shapes that Ava called feelings. They covered nearly every inch of available wall space, a gallery of a child's imagination, unfiltered and uncurated. "This is the most alive room I've ever been in. It's a mess. It's a home. There's a difference." She walked to the wall and studied a drawing Ava had done of a whale swimming through a city. Skyscrapers instead of coral reefs, cars instead of fish. "My apartment has original artwork, pieces I paid a consultant to select because I didn't trust my own taste. They're beautiful and expensive, and I've never once felt anything looking at them. This is what art is supposed to be." Ava was already pulling Victoria toward the garage, impatient with adult conversation. Mason followed them through the kitchen, past the dripping faucet and the toaster that only worked on one side and the chore chart on the refrigerator where Ava's sticker count was suspiciously higher than his, and out the back door. The garage was Mason's space, his only space, a single car garage that he'd converted into a workshop, with tools hung on pegboard walls and a workbench covered in parts, and the Honda CB35 sitting in the middle like a patient on an operating table. The motorcycle was disassembled into about 40 pieces, each one cleaned and labeled and arranged in order. The tank sat on the bench, stripped to bare metal, waiting to be painted. The engine was on a stand, rebuilt but not yet installed. The wheels leaned against the wall, new spokes gleaming. "This is the motorcycle," Ava announced, as if presenting a museum exhibit. "It's from 1972. It doesn't work yet. Daddy's been fixing it for like 100 years. 8 months, Mason corrected. "Same thing." Victoria walked slowly around the motorcycle. She touched the tank with her fingertips, running them over the bare metal the way she'd run her thumb over the edge of Ava's drawing at the park. Where did you find it? Estate sale. Old man named Walter Briggs. His family was selling his stuff after he passed. The bike was in his barn under a tarp. Hadn't run since '94. I paid $200 for it, and the guy's son threw in a box of original parts. And you're restoring it, piece by piece. When I can. Nights mostly, after Ava's asleep. Some weekends. It's slow. It's meticulous. She was looking at the labeled parts, the organized tools, the careful way he'd documented each step of the rebuild in a notebook that sat open on the workbench. You treat it like it matters. It does matter. Everything deserves to run again. If it was built to move, it should move. She looked at him across the disassembled motorcycle, and something passed between them that was harder to name than any of the parts on the workbench. An understanding. A recognition that this garage, this cluttered, oil-stained, imperfect space, was where Mason kept the part of himself that wasn't about survival. The part that believed in restoration, in taking something broken and used up and forgotten and making it run again. Can you teach me? She asked. Teach you what? About the motorcycle, the engine, how it works, what the parts do? She paused. Nobody's ever taught me anything with their hands. Everything I've learned has been from books or screens or boardrooms. I want to understand how something real works. Mason stared at her. In the harsh fluorescent light of the garage with grease stains on the floor and the smell of motor oil in the air, she looked nothing like a CEO. She looked like someone standing at the edge of unknown territory, one of those blank spaces on her antique maps, asking for directions. Okay, he said. Start with the carburetor. He spent the next 30 minutes explaining how a 1972 Honda CB350 carburetor worked. Victoria listened with the same intensity she'd brought to the soccer game, asking questions that started basic and got progressively more technical until Mason realized she was learning faster than most of the guys at the shop. You're picking this up really fast, he said. I have an engineering degree. I just never use it because I spend all day in meetings about things that don't actually exist yet. Wait, you have an engineering degree? I thought you studied computer science. Double major, plus the 1 semester of art before my father intervened. So you could have been an artist, an engineer, or a tech CEO, and you went with the one that makes you the most miserable? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the carburetor in her hands. When you say it like that, it sounds very stupid. I didn't say it. You did. I just rearranged the words. Ava, who had gotten bored with carburetor talk and was drawing on the floor of the garage, looked up. You should be all three. All three? Victoria said. Yeah, an artist and an engineer and a boss. Why do you have to pick one? Because adults think you have to specialize. Focus on one thing. Be the best at one thing. That's dumb. You have 2 hands. You can hold 2 things at once. Victoria looked at the child on the garage floor surrounded by colored pencils and motorcycle parts, and something in her expression shifted. Not a crack this time. Not a slip of the mask. The mask was gone. Mason couldn't pinpoint when it had come off. Sometime between the soccer field and the pancakes and the moment Victoria had touched the bare metal of a motorcycle tank in a mechanic's garage and called it meticulous. You're right, Ava, Victoria said. That is dumb. I know, I'm usually right. She is, Mason confirmed. It's annoying. They ordered pizza for lunch because Mason's kitchen contained nothing that could be served to a guest without embarrassment, and they ate it on the living room floor because the kitchen table only had 2 chairs. Ava sat between them with sauce on her cheek and argued passionately about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. She was firmly against, Victoria was unexpectedly in favor, and Mason abstained on the grounds that taking sides would destabilize his household. Afterward, Ava put on a movie, an animated thing about a girl and a dragon that she'd seen 14 times. And within 20 minutes, she was asleep on the floor, with her head on a throw pillow and Mr. Buttons pressed against her face. Mason covered her with a blanket and sat back against the couch. Victoria was on the other end, her legs tucked under her, watching Ava sleep with an expression that Mason had never seen on her face before. It wasn't tenderness, exactly. It was something rawer than that. Hunger. The look of someone pressing their face against the window of a life they'd been told wasn't available to them. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said quietly, so as not to wake Ava. "And it's not easy." Mason turned to face her. "Okay." She stared at the sleeping child for a long moment. "I've never wanted this. Any of this. The family thing. The domestic thing. I built my entire life around the idea that I wasn't made for this, that my parents were right, that I was built for boardrooms and balance sheets, not living rooms and pizza on the floor. I told myself that for 15 years. I believed it. I made every decision based on it. And now? And now I'm sitting on a floor that has a stain I'm pretty sure is grape juice, watching a child I've known for a week sleep with a stuffed rabbit, and I feel more at home than I have in my own apartment in 4 years. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. Just enough. And that terrifies me, Mason, because what if I'm wrong? What if I'm not made for this? What if I try and I fail and I hurt her? I can absorb a lot of failure. I've done it professionally 100 times, but I will not fail a child. I've seen what that looks like from the inside. The weight of what she was saying settled over the room like a change in pressure. Mason could feel it in his chest, in his throat, in the spaces between his ribs. She wasn't talking about him. She wasn't asking for reassurance about their relationship. She was talking about Ava, about the possibility of becoming someone in Ava's life and then discovering she couldn't sustain it, about becoming another person who walked away. "You want to know if you're going to leave," he said. "I want to know if I'm capable of staying." Mason looked at Ava on the floor, her chest rising and falling, the grape juice stain beside her elbow, the drawings on the wall above her head. "I don't know," he said. "I can't promise you that you won't leave, because I've already been through that, and it broke something in me that still isn't fully fixed. I can't promise you that this won't be hard, because it's the hardest thing I've ever done, and most days I still feel like I'm failing. And I can't promise you that Ava won't get hurt because she's 8 and the world hurts 8-year-olds regardless of how many adults stand between them and it." Victoria's eyes were wet. She didn't look away. "But I can tell you what I see," Mason continued. "I see a woman who showed up to a soccer game she didn't understand and watched my daughter like she was the most important person on the field. I see a woman who sat on a bench and drew pictures beside a child she'd just met, without trying to impress her, without performing, without doing anything except being present. I see someone whose hands shake because she's scared and who does it anyway. That's not someone who leaves. That's someone who's learning how to stay." Victoria pressed her hand against her mouth. A single tear ran down her cheek and she wiped it away with the back of her hand quickly, like she was swatting a fly. "I don't cry," she said. "Okay. I haven't cried in years." "Okay. This is extremely inconvenient." "I know." She took a breath. Then another. Then she looked at him with red eyes and blotchy cheeks and mascara she hadn't been wearing in the first place, and she said, "I'm not going to leave, Mason. You don't have to promise that." I know I don't have to. I want to, because nobody promised it to her." She looked at Ava. Her mother left without a note, without a phone call, without a single explanation. And this child grew up, and instead of becoming hard and bitter and closed off, she drew a picture of 2 people holding hands and wrote, "Be kind to her. Maybe she's lonely too." She did that. After everything, she still chose kindness. Mason couldn't speak. His throat was locked. He stared at the carpet between his boots and let the silence do what words couldn't. "I'm not her mother," Victoria said. "I know that. I'm not trying to replace anyone, but if you'll let me, I want to be someone who stays, someone she can count on. Even if I do it badly, even if I get it wrong. I'd rather get it wrong and be here than get it right from a distance." Mason reached across the couch and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, the way they always were. He held them, and she held back, and on the floor between them, Ava slept on, dreaming whatever 8-year-olds dream about when the world around them is quietly rearranging itself. They sat like that for a long time. The movie played on, unwatched. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, moving across the drawings on the wall, lighting up the whale swimming through the city, and the dragon flying over mountains, and the 3 figures standing in front of a house with wrong proportions, and a sky that was the wrong shade of blue. Eventually, Ava stirred. She opened her eyes, blinked at the ceiling, and looked at both of them sitting on the couch with their hands intertwined. "I fell asleep," she said. "You did. Did I miss the good part? Of the movie? Of anything?" Mason looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Mason. Something passed between them that didn't need words, that existed in the space beyond language, in the territory that Ava's drawings had been mapping all along. "No, Bug," Mason said. "You didn't miss anything." Ava sat up, rubbed her eyes, and looked at Victoria's hand in Mason's. She studied it the way she studied everything, carefully, thoroughly, without rushing to judgment. Then she nodded once, picked up Mr. Buttons, and walked to the kitchen. "I want more pizza," she called over her shoulder. "You just ate." "I was sleeping. That resets it. That's not how digestion works." "Ava science, Daddy." Mason looked at Victoria. She was smiling. Not her careful smile, not her boardroom smile, not the smile she wore for cameras and keynote stages. This was the smile of a woman sitting on a second-hand couch in a rented house with grape juice stains on the carpet and drawings on the walls and a child in the kitchen arguing about pizza and meaning it, every inch of it. "Ava science," Victoria repeated softly. "Welcome to the family," Mason said. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could calculate the risk or measure the weight or do any of the careful things he'd spent 6 years training himself to do. They just came out. Raw, unedited, true. Victoria squeezed his hand. In the kitchen, a cabinet opened and closed. The microwave beeped. Ava was singing something off-key, a song from the movie she'd been watching, getting half the words wrong and not caring. The house on Chestnut Street had never been loud. For 6 years, it had been a place of quiet routines and muffled worries, and a single father doing his best to fill a space that was always a little too empty. But now there was singing in the kitchen, and a woman on the couch, and a motorcycle in the garage waiting to run again, and the house was full in a way that Mason hadn't known he'd been missing until it was suddenly, undeniably, there. He leaned back against the couch, closed his eyes. Let the sound of Ava's terrible singing and the warmth of Victoria's hand and the smell of reheated pizza fill the spaces he'd been guarding for so long. The front door still stuck in the frame, the faucet still dripped, the porch board still creaked, but for the first time in 6 years, none of that mattered. The call came on a Tuesday. Mason was underneath a Dodge Ram at the shop, replacing a brake line that should have been done weeks ago when his phone rang in his back pocket. He almost let it go to voicemail. He was on his back, hands covered in brake fluid, and the bolt he'd been fighting for 20 minutes had finally started to give. But the phone kept ringing, and something about the persistence, the way it stopped for 2 seconds and then started again immediately, made him slide out from under the truck and check the screen. Victoria. She never called during work hours. They had a rhythm by now. Texts during the day, calls at night after Ava was asleep, Saturdays together. She respected his work time the way he respected her meeting schedule. A midday call meant something was wrong. "Hey," he answered, wiping brake fluid on his jeans. "Everything okay?" Her voice was tight, controlled, the way it got when she was managing something she didn't want to feel. "My father's coming to town." Mason sat on the edge of the creeper. "Okay." "Thursday. He called this morning to inform me. Not ask. Inform. He's flying in for a board meeting at Hale Technologies, a board meeting I didn't schedule, by the way, and he wants to have dinner. With me." A pause. "And with you." The brake fluid suddenly felt very cold on Mason's hands. "He knows about me?" Apparently Lily told him, which means I need to have a conversation with Lily about boundaries, but that's a separate issue. He asked who I was seeing. Lily, who has never successfully kept a secret in her entire life, told him everything, the mechanic, the daughter, the soccer games, the pancakes, everything. How'd he take it? He said, and I quote, "I'd like to evaluate the situation personally. Like I'm a subsidiary and you're a potential acquisition." Mason leaned back against the lift post. Danny was across the shop pretending to organize tools and clearly listening to every word. "So what do you want to do?" "I don't know. That's why I'm calling. I don't know what to do. I've spent my entire adult life making decisions that affect hundreds of people, and I can't figure out how to handle dinner with my own father. Do you want me to come? Silence. Then, I don't want you to come because I want him to approve. I want you to come because I'm afraid that if I sit across from him alone, I'll turn back into the version of myself that agrees with everything he says and apologizes for having feelings. Then I'll come. He's going to be difficult, Mason. He's not mean, exactly. He measures people constantly. He looks at you and calculates your value. It's how he's built. It's how he built me. Victoria. What? I fix cars for a living. I drive a truck with a cracked windshield. I can't pronounce most of the things on a fancy menu, and my best jacket has a crayon stain. Your father is going to take one look at me and calculate my value at approximately 0. I know that. I've been doing that math myself since the night we met. Mason, I'm not done. He's going to look at me and see a guy who isn't good enough for his daughter. And he might be right, but I've been sitting across from people who think I'm not enough my whole life, and I'm still here. So, yeah, I'll come to dinner, and your father can evaluate whatever he wants. I've got nothing to hide. The silence on her end was different this time, not tight, full. Thursday at 7, she said. There's a restaurant called Bellamy's on 9th. He already made the reservation. Of course he did. Wear whatever you want. I was going to anyway. He hung up and sat there for a moment, staring at the undercarriage of the Dodge Ram like it contained the answers to questions he hadn't figured out how to ask yet. Danny materialized beside him, arms crossed, grinning. Father-in-law dinner? Danny said. He's not my father-in-law. Yet. Danny, I'm just saying, meeting the parents is a big deal. This is serious. This is adult stuff. Everything about the last 6 weeks has been adult stuff. Yeah, but this is the boss-level adult stuff. This is the final exam. You need a strategy. My strategy is to show up and not lie. Danny considered this. That's either brilliant or suicidal. Probably both. Mason went back under the Dodge Ram and finished the brake line and didn't think about Thursday, or tried not to. The thought kept creeping in anyway, during the afternoon oil changes, during the drive to pick up Ava, during dinner, during the bedtime routine. He lay in bed that night and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time he'd cared about another person's approval. He couldn't remember, which meant either he'd stopped caring a long time ago or he'd just stopped putting himself in situations where it mattered. He told Ava on Wednesday. She was doing homework at the kitchen table, math this time, fractions, which she approached with the same methodical intensity she brought to everything. I'm having dinner with Victoria's dad tomorrow, he said. Ava looked up from her worksheet. Is he nice? I don't know. Victoria says he's complicated. What does complicated mean when adults say it? It usually means not nice, but in a way that's hard to explain. Ava frowned. She tapped her pencil against her chin. Are you nervous? A little. Because you want him to like you? Because I want him to see that I'm good enough for Victoria. You are good enough. Thanks, Bug. I'm not just saying it. You are. You're the best dad. You make terrible coffee, and you can't cook anything except spaghetti, and you still haven't fixed the porch light. But you're here. You're always here. That counts more than cooking. Mason reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Her fingers were small and warm, and still had pencil graphite on the tips. When did you get so smart? 3rd grade is very educational. Thursday arrived like a dental appointment. Unavoidable, unpleasant, and requiring a kind of courage that felt disproportionate to the actual event. Mason put on the blue button-down for the 3rd time, rolled the sleeves to hide the frayed cuffs, and drove downtown to Bellamy's. The restaurant was even fancier than Marchetti's, the kind of place where the lighting was designed by someone with a degree in something Mason didn't know was a degree. He stood outside for a moment, watching through the window as a waiter in a full suit carried a bottle of wine across the room like he was transporting a newborn. Victoria was waiting inside. She was wearing a dark dress, similar to the one from their first date, and her hair was pulled back tight. Full armor. He could see it in her posture, the straightness of her spine, the set of her shoulders. She'd put the CEO back on. Hey, he said, sliding into the seat beside her. Hey. She was holding a glass of water and hadn't touched it. Her fingers were wrapped around it so tight the glass could have cracked. He's not here yet. He's always exactly on time. Never early, never late. It's a power thing. Or a punctuality thing. With my father, everything is a power thing. At 7 o'clock exactly, the front door opened. Richard Hale was 63 years old and looked like a man who had been 63 for about 30 years and intended to stay there indefinitely. He was tall, taller than Mason, with silver hair combed back from a face that had been handsome once and was now mostly angular. He wore a suit that fit like it had been made for his body, which it probably had, and he moved through the restaurant with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once doubted his right to be anywhere. He spotted them, walked over, extended his hand to Mason first, which Mason recognized as a tactic. Establish dominance, assess the handshake, take the measure of the man before sitting down. Mason shook his hand. Firm grip. No contest. Just enough. Richard Hale, the man said. Mason Carter. The mechanic. The mechanic. Richard sat down, ordered a scotch without looking at the menu. The waiter practically bowed. Victoria took a sip of water that she clearly didn't taste, and the dinner began. The first 15 minutes were small talk, the kind that wasn't small at all, the kind where every question was a probe and every answer was being cataloged. Richard asked Mason about the shop, about his qualifications, about his income, though he phrased it as the economics of independent automotive repair, which was the most elegant way anyone had ever asked Mason how much money he made. Mason answered everything directly. No embellishments, no apologies. He made $42,000 a year. He rented his house. He drove a truck with a cracked windshield. He hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years. He was a good mechanic and a decent father, and he was doing the best he could with what he had. Richard listened without expression. His face was a boardroom, all polished surfaces and no visible reactions. "And your daughter," Richard said, swirling his scotch. 8 years old. Mother, not in the picture. Correct. That's a significant responsibility for a man in your position. It's a significant responsibility regardless of position. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Not warmth, more like recalculation. The look of a man whose initial assessment had been challenged by data he hadn't anticipated. "Victoria tells me you restore motorcycles," Richard said. "One motorcycle, a '72 Honda CB 350. Expensive hobby. $200, plus parts I've been collecting over 8 months. Time is expensive. Time's the only thing I have that doesn't cost money." Victoria was watching this exchange like a tennis match, her head moving slightly between the two men. Mason could feel her tension from across the table. The rigid shoulders, the jaw she was holding so tight he could see the muscles working. She was waiting for her father to do what he always did: reduce, dismiss, calculate. Richard set his glass down, leaned back, looked at Mason with the full weight of whatever evaluation he'd been running. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Carter. I'd prefer that. My daughter built a company worth $1.3 billion. She did it by the time she was 28. She's brilliant, she's driven, and she has consistently demonstrated that she does not need anyone. So you can understand my concern when my younger daughter calls me and describes a man who fixes cars and raises a child, and has apparently convinced Victoria to eat pancakes and attend children's soccer games. I didn't convince her to do anything. Then how do you explain it?" Mason set his fork down. He looked at Richard Hale, this tall, silver-haired man who measured everything and everyone and had somehow raised a daughter who collected antique maps and carried her sister's drawing in her coat pocket like a talisman against loneliness. And he felt something unexpected. Not anger, not intimidation, pity. "Your daughter is lonely," Mason said. "She has been for a very long time. She built something incredible, and she did it alone. And somewhere along the way, the aloneness became the whole structure. It's not just how she works. It's how she lives. She times your phone calls, Richard. Did you know that? She counts the minutes because if she doesn't measure them, she'll believe they lasted longer than they did. She'll believe they meant more than they did." The table went silent. Victoria's hand found Mason's knee under the tablecloth, not squeezing, just resting there. An anchor. Richard's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. The boardroom facade held, but barely. I've given Victoria every advantage. You gave her tools, Mason said, and she used them. She built an empire with them. But tools aren't the same as presents. Tools aren't Sunday phone calls where you ask how she's doing instead of how the company's doing. Tools aren't showing up at her apartment with takeout because you notice she sounds tired. I know the difference because I've been making the same mistake with my own daughter. I've been so busy providing for Ava that I almost forgot to just be with her. Your daughter reminded me of that. She reminded me that the only thing that actually matters isn't what you build, it's who you build it with. Richard Hale stared at Mason Carter across a table that might as well have been an ocean. Two men from two different worlds, two different tax brackets, two different ideas about what it meant to be enough. The waiter hovered nearby, sensed the atmosphere, and disappeared. You're very blunt, Richard said finally. I'm a mechanic. We don't have time for subtext. And you think you're good enough for my daughter? No, I think I'm honest enough. I think I show up. I think I stay. Whether that's good enough is something Victoria gets to decide. Not you, not me. Her. Victoria's hand tightened on his knee. He glanced at her. She was looking at him with an expression he'd seen once before. In the parking lot of Margie's diner, right before she'd hugged him. That look of someone who'd just been given something they didn't know they needed. Richard lifted his scotch and took a slow drink, set the glass down, looked at his daughter. Victoria, he said. Yes. Is this what you want? The question hung in the air, not a business question, not a strategic assessment. A father's question, buried under decades of boardroom language and emotional distance, but still recognizably a father's question. Victoria looked at Mason, then at her father. Yes, Richard nodded. Once. Slowly. The nod of a man who was revising a spreadsheet he'd been running his whole life and discovering a column he'd never accounted for. Then I'd like to meet your daughter, Mr. Carter, if that's acceptable. Mason blinked. Of everything he'd expected from this dinner, hostility, dismissal, a lecture about financial responsibility, an invitation wasn't on the list. You want to meet Ava? If the girl is anything like what Lily described, and if she's the reason my daughter carries crayon drawings in her coat pocket, then yes, I'd like to meet her. Mason looked at Victoria. She looked as surprised as he felt. I'll talk to Ava, Mason said. If she's comfortable with it, we'll set something up. Fair enough? Richard signaled the waiter and ordered dinner for the table without consulting anyone, which was the most Richard Hale thing he'd done all evening. But when the food came, he asked Mason about the motorcycle. Not the cost, not the resale value. He asked about the engine, how it ran, what it sounded like when a rebuild was done right. And Mason, who had been bracing for a fight he didn't get, spent the rest of dinner explaining the internal combustion cycle of a 1972 Honda CB35 to a billionaire who listened like he actually wanted to learn. They said goodbye outside the restaurant. Richard shook Mason's hand again. Longer this time, firmer. He looked at Victoria and said something Mason couldn't hear, but whatever it was made Victoria close her eyes for a moment and nod. Then Richard got into a black town car and disappeared. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, the city noise swirling around her, and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 2 hours. What did he say to you? Mason asked. He said, I look happy. Her voice caught. He's never said that before. He said I look professional, prepared, impressive, never happy. Mason put his arm around her shoulder. She leaned into him, and they stood there on the sidewalk the way they'd stood outside Marchetti's on that first night. Two people who had no business being together and no interest in being apart. Come on, he said. I'll buy you terrible diner coffee to wash the taste of overpriced scotch out of your mouth. It's 9:30. Margie's is open till 10. Your coffee is still criminal. I'll let Linda make it this time. They drove to Margie's in Mason's truck, the cracked windshield splitting the streetlights into fragments. Victoria sat in the passenger seat with her shoes off and her feet on the dashboard and her hair coming loose from the tight style she'd worn like armor. She looked tired and relieved and slightly bewildered, like someone who'd just survived something she'd been dreading her entire life and discovered it hadn't killed her. Linda was closing up, but let them in anyway, because Linda had been watching this whole thing unfold over Saturday coffee dates, and she wasn't about to miss whatever chapter came next. She brought them pie, apple, heated, whipped cream, and coffee that was only slightly better than Mason's, and left them alone in the back booth. "He liked you," Victoria said. "He tolerated me. There's a difference." "No, he liked you. I've sat in 1,000 meetings with my father. I know his tells. When he doesn't like someone, he interrupts. He interrupts constantly. He didn't interrupt you once." Maybe he was in shock. Maybe. Or maybe a mechanic from Chestnut Street told him something nobody else has ever had the nerve to say, and he needed a minute to process it. Mason ate his pie. "I probably should have been more diplomatic. You told my father he was a bad parent to his face over dinner at a restaurant that charges $40 for a salad. Was that wrong?" "It was the most right thing anyone's ever done for me." They sat in the booth at Margie's and ate pie and drank average coffee and didn't talk about the future. They didn't need to. The future had been decided somewhere between a soccer game and a garage and a billionaire's Scotch glass. Not decided in the way of contracts or proposals or grand declarations. Decided the way real things are decided, slowly, clumsily, through a series of small moments that accumulate until they become a life. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday in late October, Mason finished the motorcycle. He'd been working on it all week after Ava went to bed, fitting the final pieces into place with the care of someone who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. The tank was painted, not the original color, but a deep midnight blue that Ava had chosen from a paint chart, pointing at it and saying, "That one. It looks like the sky right before the stars come out." He'd installed the engine, connected the fuel line, replaced the cables, adjusted the chain. And on Saturday morning, with Ava sitting on an overturned bucket and Victoria leaning in the garage doorway, he turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, coughed again. Then it caught, and the garage filled with the sound of a machine that had been silent for 30 years coming back to life. It wasn't a clean sound. It was rough and uneven and needed tuning. But it ran. It actually ran. Ava covered her ears and grinned so wide her face couldn't hold it. Victoria watched the motorcycle like she was watching a metaphor she finally understood. Mason sat on the seat and felt the vibration travel through his legs and up through his chest and into the place where he kept all the things he'd been too afraid to hope for. A machine built to move, finally moving again. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but moving. He turned off the engine. The garage went quiet. The smell of exhaust hung in the air. "It runs," Ava said, with the reverence of someone witnessing a miracle. "It runs," Mason said. Victoria walked over and put her hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were warm for once. That afternoon, they went to Lakeview Park. It was Ava's idea, of course. Everything important was Ava's idea. She wanted to go to the lake because the leaves were changing, and she wanted to draw them. And she wanted Victoria to come because Victoria always came now. Because Victoria was part of Saturdays the way soccer and pancakes and terrible coffee were part of Saturdays. The borders of their lives had shifted over 6 weeks, expanding to include another person, and the expansion felt less like an addition and more like a correction. Like the picture had always been incomplete, and they were only just now seeing the whole frame. The park was different in October. The grass was dry and gold, and the trees along the lake had turned amber and burnt orange and a deep red that Ava called angry autumn. Leaves covered the walking paths in thick, crackling layers. The fisherman was there, the same one, or maybe a different one, it was hard to tell, casting his line into water that reflected the sky like a dirty mirror. Ava ran ahead. She always ran ahead. 8 years old, too much energy, legs that moved faster than caution. She charged into a pile of leaves that someone had raked near the parking lot and kicked them into the air and spun around with her arms out and her face tilted toward a sky she was too young to appreciate and too alive to ignore. Mason and Victoria walked behind her, side by side, not touching, not talking, just walking the way people walk when they've said everything that needs to be said and can finally exist in the silence without filling it. Victoria was carrying 2 things in her jacket pocket. She'd shown him earlier, at the house, laying them on the kitchen table side by side. Ava's drawing, the stick figures holding hands, be kind to her, maybe she's lonely too. And Lily's drawing, the two girls under a yellow sun. You're not invisible. I see you. She carried them everywhere, every jacket, every coat, every day. Two pieces of paper made by two children years apart, both saying the same thing in the only language that had ever gotten through. You are seen. You are not alone. Somebody drew you into the picture. Ava stopped running. She was standing at the edge of the lake, looking out across the water where the late afternoon sun was turning everything gold. The leaves around her feet were red and orange and brown, and the wind was picking them up and carrying them in slow spirals across the path. She turned around and looked at Mason and Victoria, who were walking toward her at the pace of people who had nowhere else to be. "Victoria," Ava called out. "Yes." "Are you still lonely?" The question traveled across the distance between them, across the leaves and the grass and the 6 weeks of soccer games and pancakes and pie and phone calls and crayon drawings and one disassembled motorcycle put back together in a garage on Chestnut Street. It traveled across 4 years of Victoria's solitude and 6 years of Mason's and 8 years of a child's quiet understanding that the world was full of people standing alone in parks, pretending it was a choice. Victoria stopped walking. She looked at the little girl standing by the lake in her yellow shirt with leaves in her hair and grass stains on her jeans and the kind of directness in her eyes that most people spent their whole lives trying to unlearn. "No," Victoria said. One word, one syllable. But Mason heard everything inside it. The 12-year-old in the library, the CEO in the empty apartment, the woman who timed her father's phone calls and carried children's drawings in her pocket and had spent her life convinced she was built for boardrooms, not living rooms. All of it compressed into a single word that meant, I was for a very long time, but I'm not anymore. And the reason I'm not is standing right in front of me in a yellow shirt asking a question that nobody else has ever thought to ask. Ava nodded, satisfied, like she'd been waiting for that answer and had known it was coming but needed to hear it anyway. Then she turned and ran. Into the leaves, through the leaves, kicking them up with every step, sending them spinning into the air in clouds of red and gold. She ran the way children run when they're not running from anything or toward anything, but simply running because their bodies contain more joy than standing still can hold. Mason watched her. Victoria watched her. They stood side by side on the path, two people who had spent years building walls and locking doors and convincing themselves that alone was the same as safe. Watching a child demolish that entire theory with nothing but a pair of sneakers and a pile of leaves. "She's going to ruin those shoes," Victoria said. "She ruins every pair of shoes. I've given up. Those are the ones with the Velcro straps that she refuses to tie. She says laces are inefficient." She's right. Mason reached over and took Victoria's hand. She took his. Their fingers laced together, his rough, calloused, permanently stained with grease in the creases. Hers smooth, strong, with the slight tremor that came and went depending on how much she was feeling and how hard she was trying not to show it. "I need to tell you something," Mason said. "Okay? I love you." He didn't say it the way people say it in stories, with music swelling and perfect lighting and a speech that builds to a crescendo. He said it the way mechanics say things, plainly, without decoration, like stating a fact about an engine. This is how it works. This is what's happening. Here are the parts, and here's the truth. Victoria's hand tightened in his. Her tremor steadied. "I love you too," she said. "And I'm absolutely terrible at this. I know. I'm going to mess things up. I work too much. I don't know how to cook. I have no idea what third graders need. I'm going to say the wrong thing at parent-teacher conferences and probably offend at least one soccer mom before the season's over. You'll offend Lisa first. She's the most offendable. I'm serious, Mason. So am I. You're going to mess things up. I'm going to mess things up. We're going to fight about something stupid at some point, probably about the dishes, or about me leaving my boots by the door, or about the fact that you can't stop checking your email during dinner. And it's going to be hard. Not movie hard. Real hard. The kind of hard that makes you question everything at 2 a.m. when the house is quiet and the doubts are loud. You're really selling this. But we're going to do it anyway. Because Ava drew a picture of 3 people in front of a house, and she was right. The proportions were off, but she was right. Victoria looked at him. The sunset was painting her face in warm colors that hid the redness around her eyes, and the slight puffiness that came from someone who was trying very hard not to cry and mostly succeeding. The proportions were off. The house was too small, and the people were too big. Maybe the people are supposed to be bigger than the house. Mason looked at Ava, still running through the leaves, still kicking them into the air, still burning with an energy that defied the approaching evening. Then he looked at Victoria, standing beside him in jeans and sneakers and a jacket with 2 children's drawings in the pocket. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe they are." They started walking again, toward Ava, toward the lake, toward whatever came next. The awkward family dinners, the mismatched worlds, the fluorescent lights and boardroom calls and bedtime stories and motorcycles that ran rough but ran. Toward all of it. Not because they had it figured out, not because the path was clear or the future was certain or the map showed them where they were going, because the map had blank spaces. And 200 years ago, that used to be normal, and people still kept moving. Ava stopped running and turned around, out of breath, leaves in her hair, her face flushed from the cold air. She looked at the 2 of them walking toward her, her father with his rough hands and his cracked windshield and his 6 years of doing everything alone, and the woman who collected old maps and carried drawings in her pockets and had learned, slowly and clumsily and in the way that real things are learned, how to stay. "Come on," Ava yelled. "You're so slow." "We're coming, Bug. Walk faster. The good leaves are over here." "What makes them the good leaves?" "They crunch better." Obviously. Mason looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Mason. And they walked faster, because the good leaves were over there, and their daughter, was waiting. And the sun was setting, and the air smelled like autumn, and the evening was coming. And the house on Chestnut Street was small, but it was warm, and the door still stuck in the frame, but everyone who needed to be inside was going to make it through. Love didn't arrive the way Mason had always imagined it would. Not with fireworks or grand gestures or the feeling of everything clicking into place like a movie ending. It arrived the way most real things arrive, gradually, imperfectly, carried in the pocket of a jacket alongside crayon drawings and old sketches, built from Saturday mornings and average coffee and conversations that went on too long, and a child who saw what adults were too scared to see. It arrived like a motorcycle engine turning over after 30 years of silence. Rough at first, uneven, needing work, but running. Finally, after all that time, running. The 3 of them walked through the leaves together as the last of the daylight faded behind the trees. Ava ran ahead, because she always ran ahead, because 8-year-olds don't wait for the world to be ready. Mason and Victoria followed, side by side, hand in hand, 2 people who had been alone for so long that togetherness still felt like a foreign language they were learning 1 word at a time. But they were learning, slowly, badly, with terrible coffee and sticky tables and a porch light that still needed replacing. And that was enough. Not perfect, not complete. Not the ending anyone would write if they wanted it to be clean and easy. But enough. More than enough.